Hey guys, howdy! I hope you're fine. As you've seen in the thumbnail, in this video we're going to see, what if Naruto infused with Hex Crystal? Naruto x Jinx? Part 2, I request you to check the author of this fanfic and show some love and support. Name of the story is Monsters Are Made, not born by, spell RGN, do check it out. All details in description. And if you want next part of this series, please leave a like and comment 5 blue emoji. Let's get into the video. Also check out Patreon for I have upload Naruto x Daenerys Targaryen in censored spicy version. Link in description. The skies over Piltover were unusually gray. A solemn veil draped over the city as the citizens gathered to mourn one of their most beloved families. The Uzumaki estate had once stood as a beacon of prosperity and stability, its loss leaving a void not just in the lives of those who knew Minato, Kushina, and Naruto, but in the heart of Piltover itself. The Grand Plaza near the academy was filled with somber faces. Counselors, prominent families, enforcers, and citizens alike had come to pay their respects. A statue of Minato and Kushina, hastily erected as a temporary memorial, loomed over the gathering, their likenesses carved with expressions of strength and compassion. Beside it, a smaller pedestal bore a wreath of flowers for Naruto. The boy who had been declared dead after weeks of searching yielded no sign of him. The Kiraman family stood at the front of the crowd. Tobias and Cassandra Kiraman were dressed in formal black, their faces composed, but their eyes reflecting the sorrow they carried. Beside them, Caitlin stood tall, her young face hardened with determination beneath her grief. Though only a teenager, she had already resolved to take the tragedy as a call to action. As the ceremony began, Counselor Mel Medarda stepped forward, her voice steady but filled with emotion. Today, we honor the memory of Minato and Kushina Uzumaki, two of Piltover's finest citizens, whose lives were dedicated to the progress and prosperity of this great city. Their loss is a tragedy we will carry with us for years to come. Her words carried over the crowd, but Caitlin barely heard them. Her mind was elsewhere, consumed by memories of the Uzumakis. She remembered Minato's wisdom, Kushina's warmth, and Naruto's boundless energy. She thought of the moments she had spent with them, how Naruto's mischievous grin had always brightened the darkest days. The knowledge that he was gone now felt like a weight on her chest. When Mel finished, the Kiramans stepped forward to place their offerings at the base of the statue. Tobias placed a collection of Minato's writings that he had admired for years. Cassandra offered a bouquet of red roses, one for each member of the family. Caitlin hesitated, clutching a small wooden carving in her hands. It was a fox, one Naruto had admired during a festival years ago. She knelt to place it among the flowers, her fingers lingering on the carving as she whispered, "I'll miss you." As the family stepped back, Tobias turned to his daughter, sensing her inner turmoil. "Caitlin," he said softly, "you don't have to carry this burden alone." She looked up at him, her blue eyes fierce despite the tears threatening to spill. "I can't let this happen again, Father. I can't just stand by while people like Minato, Kushina, and Naruto are taken from us." Cassandra placed a gentle hand on Caitlin's shoulder. "What are you saying, Caitlin?" "I'm saying I want to do something about it," Caitlin replied, her voice resolute. "I'm going to become an enforcer. I'll protect people. I'll make sure no family has to go through this again." Her parents exchanged a glance, their expressions a mix of concern and pride. They knew Caitlin's decision was born of grief, but they also recognized her determination. Tobias nodded slowly. "If that's the path you choose, Caitlin, then we'll support you. But know that it's not an easy one." "I don't want easy," Caitlin said firmly. "I want to make a difference." As next it was Jace's turn to speak, he hesitated for a moment, his heart pounding. He stepped forward, unfolding the paper in his hand but soon abandoning it, speaking instead from the depths of his heart. Minato was a visionary. Jace began, his voice heavy with emotion. He believed in the power of progress not just for Piltover's elite, but for everyone, from the highest spire to the deepest shadows. "Minato didn't just guide me in my work. He shaped the very way I think, the way I see the world." He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd. "It's because of him that I dared to dream of a future where magic and science could coexist, a future where we could harness the power of the arcane, not to destroy, but to create. The work I've done, the breakthroughs we've made with Hextech, none of it would have been possible without Minato's guidance. Jace swallowed hard, his voice faltering for a moment before he continued. This tragedy has shown me just how fragile our world is, how quickly we can lose the people we love. But it's also shown me what we must fight for a world where this doesn't happen again. A world where everyone can thrive. He turned to the statue of Minato and Kushina, his expression resolute. I promise you, Minato, I won't let your vision die. I'll carry it forward, no matter the cost. I will make this world better for you, for Kushina, and for Naruto. Jay stepped back, his chest heaving as he finished. The crowd remained silent, his words hanging in the air like a vow etched into stone. As the ceremony concluded, the crowd began to disperse, leaving the plaza in a hushed solemnity. Caitlin stood near the memorial, her fingers brushing over the fox carving she had placed. Jace approached her, his expression weary but hopeful. He would have wanted more for us, Jace said quietly, standing beside her. More for this city. Caitlin nodded, her voice steady despite her grief. Then we'll make it happen. For them. Together, they looked up at the statue, their paths seemingly divergent, but united by a shared determination. The loss of the Uzumakis was a wound that would never fully heal, but their legacy would live on in Caitlin's promise to protect the innocent and in Jace's dream of a brighter future shaped by Hextech. As they walked away, the gray skies began to part, the faintest sliver of sunlight breaking through the clouds. Caitlin looked up. She thought of Naruto, of the future he had been so excited to embrace. It felt wrong that he would never have the chance to grow, to laugh, to see his dreams realized. But as much as it hurt, Caitlin vowed to carry his memory forward. She would honor them by dedicating herself to the ideals they had lived by justice, kindness, and progress. Caitlin made a silent promise to herself that I'll protect this city. I'll protect the people in it. And I'll do it for them for Minato, Kushina, and Naruto. 3 years later, the underworld. The early years of Silco's reign over Zaun's underworld were marked not by brute force, but by calculated strategy. He wielded charisma and fear with equal precision, dismantling rivals not with violence, but with promises of unity and power. The Shimmer trade flourished under his rule, its addictive glow fueling his empire and binding the desperate to his cause. For 3 years, the peace held, but whispers began to spread of new gangs, of young leaders hungry for power. Silco recognized the danger immediately. The balance he had so carefully constructed was under threat. In his office at the last drop, Silco leaned back in his chair, staring at a map of Zaun dotted with marks indicating potential threats. His sharp features were illuminated by the faint glow of a shimmer vial on his desk. He tapped his fingers against the wood, deep in thought. "They're restless," Sevika said from the doorway, her tone neutral but tinged with concern. "Hungry for a piece of what you've built." Silco didn't respond immediately, his sharp gaze focused on a cluster of marks. After a moment, he exhaled slowly. "Then we remind them who truly holds the leash. Bring them to me," Silco said, his voice calm but commanding. Sevika nodded, disappearing into the shadows of the club. Moments later, the door creaked open, and 2 figures stepped inside. Jinx and Naruto. At 14, Jinx had grown into her manic energy. Her eyes sparkled with mischief as she swung her legs lazily, sitting on the arm of a chair. Her bright blue hair, tied into long braids, swayed as she turned her attention to Silco and Naruto, her energy barely contained. She chattered incessantly, her words tumbling over one another. Occasionally, her manic energy would pause, and a glimpse of a younger Powder would shine through her voice softer. Almost shy, but those moments were fleeting. Beside her stood Naruto, his blonde hair slightly unkempt, his posture relaxed but ready. At 14, he was tall for his age, his glowing blue eyes giving him an otherworldly presence. The crystal embedded in his chest pulsed faintly, hidden beneath his shirt, but ever present. As he glanced at Jinx out of the corner of his eye, his concern for her unspoken, but evident. "I have a task for you," Silco began, his voice smooth and commanding. 3 gang leaders. Smeech, Margot and Cross. They've been making a name for themselves, and I don't like noise in my city. Jinx's grin widened. Finally, some action. I'm ready to blow something up. Naruto shot her a look, his tone even. Let's keep the explosions to a minimum. Jinx, she pouted, but the mischievous glint in her eye didn't fade. Fine. But only because you asked so nicely. Silco's gaze lingered on the two of them, his expression calculating. Do what's necessary to ensure they fall in line. If they resist, remind them who runs Zon. Naruto nodded. Understood. Silco leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. I trust your judgment, Naruto. Make sure it's handled. Jinx twirled one of her braids, her excitement palpable. This is going to be fun. As they turned to leave, Sevika stepped forward from the shadows. Are you sure about this? She asked, her voice low. Sending them together? Jinx is unstable. Silco waved her off, his confidence unwavering. Naruto will make sure it works out. He's the missing puzzle piece, Sevika. Together, they'll deliver. Naruto and Jinx stood at the entrance of an old factory deep in the industrial ruins of Zon. The building, cloaked in shadows and silence, loomed like a tombstone for those who dared to cross its threshold. It was the base of operations for the Hush Company, a gang notorious for its precision assassinations and ruthless enforcement of silence in their dealings. Naruto adjusted the hood of his cloak, his glowing blue eyes flickering faintly beneath the shadows of his face. Jinx, standing beside him, cracked her neck and twirled one of her braids absent-mindedly, her mismatched eyes alight with both excitement and mischief. Quiet place, Jinx said, her voice cutting through the oppressive silence. Kinda spooky, don't you think? They're called the Hush Company for a reason, Naruto replied, his voice low and calm. He scanned the area, every sense on high alert. Stay close. Ah, you're worried about me. Jinx teased, but she fell in a step behind him as they entered the factory. The interior was dimly lit, shafts of pale light piercing through broken windows. The sound of their footsteps echoed eerily, the factory seemingly abandoned. But Naruto knew better. They're watching us, he murmured. A single spotlight illuminated a figure standing on an elevated platform above them. Cross, the leader of the Hush Company, was a tall, wiry man with a sharp, angular face. His eyes were coved by black sunglasses, but they was calculating and predatory, his posture exuding quiet confidence. He wore a finely tailored suit with a top hat, an odd contrast to the decrepit surroundings, and his hands rested on a cane that looked more ornamental than functional. Silco's messengers, Cross said, his voice smooth and deliberate. I've heard much about you, too. The blue-eyed demon and his partner Jinx. Jinx smirked, waving cheerfully. Hiya. We're here to ruin your day. Naruto remained still, his glowing eyes locked on Cross. We're here to offer you a choice, he said, his tone cold and firm. You fall in line with Silco, or you don't operate in Zon anymore. Cross chuckled, the sound low and unsettling. A bold ultimatum, boy. But this is Zon. Nothing here comes without a test. Cross snapped his fingers, and the sound echoed ominously in the cavernous space. From the shadows, figures emerged silent and swift, each one armed and dressed in black, their faces obscured by masks. Naruto counted at least a dozen assassins, their movements eerily synchronized. Show me, Cross said, leaning slightly on his cane. Show me why they call you the blue-eyed demon. Jinx's grin widened as she reached for her minigun. Oh, I've been waiting for this. Naruto held up a hand, stopping her. No, he said firmly. Let them come. The assassins attacked as one, their blades gleaming in the faint light. They moved with precision, their silence unnerving, but Naruto stood his ground. His glowing blue eyes flared brightly, and the air around him crackled with energy. The first assassin lunged, his blade aimed for Naruto's throat. In a blur of motion, Naruto sidestepped, grabbing the attacker's wrist and twisting it with inhuman strength. The blade clattered to the ground, and a single punch sent the assassin flying into a wall. The room exploded into chaos as the remaining assassins closed in. Naruto moved like a storm, his glowing eyes and crackling energy illuminating the dim factory. He dodged blades with ease, his movements fluid and precise. Each strike he delivered was calculated, incapacitating his opponents with brutal efficiency. Jinx watched from the sidelines, her hands resting on her weapon but not firing. Her mismatched eyes sparkled with delight as Naruto fought. "Damn, Rito," she muttered. "You're stealing the show." As the last assassin fell, groaning in pain on the floor, Naruto turned across. His chest heaved slightly, his glowing eyes locking onto the gang leader's cold gaze. The faint glow of the crystal in his chest pulsed beneath his shirt, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Cross descended from the platform slowly, his cane tapping against the floor with each step. He approached Naruto, his expression unreadable. "You're impressive," Cross admitted, his voice calm but tinged with respect. "I see now why Silco values you. That power, it's not something I've seen before." Naruto didn't respond, his glowing eyes staring unblinkingly at Cross. The silence stretched between them, heavy and charged. Cross finally stopped a few feet away, inclining his head slightly. "You have my loyalty," he said. "Silco runs on. I won't challenge that." Jinx skipped forward, clapping her hands. "See? That wasn't so hard. You should have just said yes from the start." Cross glanced at her, a flicker of amusement crossing his face. "You're an interesting pair." Naruto stepped closer, his glowing eyes boring into Cross's soul. "Don't forget this moment," he said quietly, his voice carrying an edge that sent a chill through the room. "Because next time, there won't be a choice." Cross nodded solemnly. "Understood." As they left the factory, Jinx swung her arms lazily, her grin ever present. "Well, that was fun. You think the next one will put up a better fight?" Naruto didn't respond immediately, his mind focused on the task ahead. "Doesn't matter," he said eventually. "They'll all fall in line." Jinx nudged him playfully. "You're really embracing this whole blue-eyed demon thing, huh?" Naruto glanced at her, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "If it works, it works." Jinx laughed, skipping ahead as they disappeared into the shadows of Zaun. Their first victory solidifying Naruto's growing reputation as a force to be reckoned with. Up next was the VYX's base of operations was tucked away in the heart of Zaun's darker streets, a lavish brothel that exuded wealth and indulgence. The building stood out against the decaying surroundings, its glowing red lanterns and velvet curtains, inviting clientele into a world of pleasure and secrecy. Inside, the air was thick with perfume and the faint hum of music, a stark contrast to the grimy chaos of the city outside. Naruto and Jinx entered the brothel, their presence immediately drawing attention. The workers paused in their duties, their eyes darting nervously toward the pair. Whispers filled the air, and many averted their gaze, recognizing the infamous duo. "This place reeks," Jinx muttered, her eyes darting around the room. "Why'd it have to be this kind of place?" Naruto ignored her, his eyes scanning the room. At the center of it all, lounging with effortless poise on a crimson chaise, sat Margot. She was slender and petite, her pale skin almost glowing under the dim, warm lighting. Her dirty blonde hair was dyed black at the tips, cascading in loose waves over her shoulders. She wore dark, dramatic makeup that made her piercing eyes even more striking, her lips painted in a shade of deep crimson. Her outfit was daring, a mix of black leather and red cloth that clung to her figure, adorned with gold accessories that jingled softly as she moved. She exuded confidence and allure, every inch of her commanding attention. Margot's lips curved into a knowing smirk as Naruto and Jinx approached. She placed her glass of wine on a nearby table and rested her chin in her hand, her gaze flicking between the two of them. Well, she drawled, her voice low and teasing. "To what do I owe the pleasure of this illustrious visit?" Naruto stepped forward, his tone even but cold. "Silco sent us. He wants your loyalty." Margot leaned back, feigning indifference as she studied him. "Silco's loyal dogs, I've heard of you." Her eyes lingered on Naruto's glowing blue gaze, and her smirk deepened. "Especially you, the blue-eyed demon. They say you're more than a legend." Jinx bristled beside him, her fingers flexing on her weapon. "Watch it, lady." Margot ignored her, rising gracefully from her seat. Her heels clicked softly against the polished floor as she approached them, her movements deliberate and measured. She stopped just a few feet for Naruto, tilting her head slightly as she looked him over. Those eyes, she murmured, her voice softer now, almost a whisper. They're even more mesmerizing in person. And that power. She reached out a hand, as if to touch him, but stopped just short. If only you were a little older. Naruto's expression didn't change, but his glowing eyes narrowed slightly. We're not here to play games. Before Margot could respond, Jinx stepped between them, her body tense and her eyes blazing. Back off, she snapped, her voice sharp. He's not interested. Margot's smirk widened, and she raised an eyebrow. Oh, is that jealousy I hear? She teased, her tone light, but laced with amusement. I wasn't aware the demon had already been claimed. Jinx's hands twitched toward her minigun, and her grin turned dangerous. Say that again, and I'll… Jinx! Naruto interrupted, his voice steady but commanding. He placed a hand on her shoulder, gently pulling her back. That's enough. Jinx hesitated, her glare fixed on Margot, but she relented with a huff, stepping aside reluctantly. Margot chuckled softly, clearly enjoying the interaction. What a fascinating pair you two make, she said, her gaze lingering on Naruto. You must have your hands full with her. Naruto didn't rise to the bait, his voice calm but firm. Are you going to cooperate or not? Margot's playful demeanor shifted slightly, her smirk softening into something more sincere. Relax, demon, she said, holding up her hands in mock surrender. The VYX know where their bread is buttered. Silco's rule is good for business. I had no intention of going against him. Then why the theatrics? Naruto asked, his glowing eyes narrowing slightly. Margot shrugged elegantly, her gold accessories jingling softly with emotion. A girl's gotta have her fun, she said, her voice light. But let me make this clear, I'll follow Silco. No threats needed. Naruto studied her for a moment, his glowing gaze unyielding. Finally, he nodded. Good. As they turned to leave, Margot called after them. You know, she said, her voice lilting, if Silco ever stops appreciating you, there's always a place for you here, demon. Naruto didn't respond, but Jinx spun around, her grin sharp and feral. Not happening, she said, her voice dripping with menace. He's ours, Margot chuckled, raising her glass in a mock toast. Fair enough. Take care, you two. Outside the brothel, Jinx fumed as they walked through the dim streets. She was so annoying, she muttered. Kept looking at you like you were some kind of prize. Naruto smirked faintly, glancing at her. Jealous. Jinx's eyes widened briefly before she scowled, her cheeks flushing pink. Shut up. Naruto chuckled softly, his tension from the encounter easing as they disappeared into the shadows of Zaun. Despite Margot's flirtations, the mission was another success. The last drop welcomed Naruto and Jinx as they returned from their mission. The barhead was slowly turning into a nightclub now that Silco was in charge. The clink of glasses, the murmur of conversations, and the occasional burst of laughter was muted as they entered. Their reputation preceded them, and every head turned to watch the infamous duo stride through the crowd. Naruto's hood was pulled low over his face, his glowing blue eyes faintly visible beneath the shadow. Jinx trailed beside him, her energy practically crackling in the air. She twirled her braid absent-mindedly, her grin sharp as she caught people staring. Home sweet home, Jinx muttered, swinging her minigun over her shoulder. Naruto didn't reply, his focus already on Silco's office at the back of the establishment. They ascended the staircase silently, their footsteps echoing on the metal steps. Silco was seated behind his desk, a cigar smoldering between his fingers. His mismatched eyes flicked up as they entered, and a slow smile spread across his face. The faint scent of smoke and shimmer lingered in the air, mixing with the dim, flickering light of the lamps. Back so soon, he drawled, leaning back in his chair. I trust it went well. Naruto stepped forward, his voice calm and direct. Cross and Margot are in line. They won't cause any problems. Silco's sharp gaze shifted to Jinx, who was practically bouncing on the balls of her feet. Anything to add? He asked, his tone laced with amusement. Jinx grinned, tossing her braid over her shoulder. They're scared of us, especially him. She gestured toward Naruto, her grin widening. You should have seen the look on their faces when he lit up. Priceless. Silco chuckled softly, exhaling a plume of smoke. Good. I expected nothing less. Naruto crossed his arms, his glowing eyes narrowing slightly. Who's next? Silco's expression hardened, and he leaned forward, extinguishing his cigar in a nearby ashtray. Smeech, he said, his tone heavy. Leader of the scrap hackers. He's a stubborn one. Likes to think he can outwit anyone. Jinx tilted her head, her mismatched eyes sparkling with curiosity. So what's his deal? Silco tapped his fingers against the desk, his gaze distant. Smeech runs his gang like a fortress. He's paranoid, clever, and resourceful. He won't bend easily, and he certainly won't fall in line without a fight. Naruto's jaw tightened, his glowing eyes steady. Then I'll do what's needed. Silco's gaze flicked to him, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. I trust you will. Sevika, standing near the doorway, scoffed softly. He's not just clever. He's dangerous. You'd better watch her back. Jinx's grin widened, and she patted her minigun affectionately. Danger's kind of our thing. Silco waved a hand dismissively. Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll test you both. Smeech won't go down without a struggle. As they left Silco's office, Jinx turned to Naruto, her grin fading slightly. So, what do you want to play this? Naruto glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. We'll start with the usual. Talk first, see where it goes. But if he pushes back, he trailed off, his glowing eyes darkening slightly. We'll make an example of him. Jinx's grin returned, sharp and eager. I like the sound of that. Naruto didn't reply, his mind already racing with possibilities. Smeech would be their hardest challenge yet, but he was determined to succeed. His reputation as the blue-eyed demon was growing, and he wouldn't allow anything or anyone to tarnish it. As they descended the stairs, Jinx nudged him playfully. You know, we're getting really good at this. Naruto smirked faintly, his glowing eyes flicking toward her. We've always been good at this. Jinx laughed, the sound bright and unhinged. Damn right we have. The air was heavy with the acrid stench of burning metal and oil as Naruto and Jinx approached the sprawling scrapyard that served as the base of the scrap hackers. Piles of twisted metal and discarded machinery formed jagged towers, creating a labyrinth of mechanical debris. Sparks flew from welding torches, and the clatter of tools echoed through the night as workers tinkered with cybernetic modifications, their faces lit by the glow of their craft. Naruto took his hood off, the faint glow of his blue eyes shining through the shadows. Beside him, Jinx practically vibrated with energy, her mismatched eyes darting around as she hummed an off-key tune. Creepy place, Jinx muttered, swinging her minigun over her shoulder. Smells like rust and failure. Naruto didn't respond, his gaze fixed ahead. The scrap hackers were known for their expertise in illegal cybernetics, but their leader, Smeech, was a paranoid megalomaniac who fancied himself invincible. Naruto wasn't here to negotiate, he was here to make a point. Smeech stood at the center of the scrapyard, a platform of rusted machinery that served as his throne. He was a yordle, his small, round face framed by a patchy layer of coarse, brownish fur. His pointed ears twitched slightly as he noticed them, his expression shifting between curiosity and disdain. Despite his natural stature, he stood tall thanks to crude mechanical extensions attached to his arms and legs. The augmentations creaked and hissed as he moved, their joints glowing faintly with green chem tech energy. Smeech descended from his platform with exaggerated, clunky movements, his mechanical limbs making him appear grotesque and imposing. He stopped a few feet away, his smirk widening as he looked down at Naruto and Jinx. Smeech let out a cackling laugh. Well, what do we have here? He sneered, his voice grating. A couple of children playing at being enforcers. Jinx tilted her head, her grin sharp. Enforcers? Oh no, we're much worse. Naruto remained silent, his glowing eyes locked on Smeech. The leader of the scrap hackers didn't seem fazed, his gaze flicking dismissively between them. Silco must be desperate, sending kids to do his dirty work. Smeech continued, his tone mocking. Tell me, demon, do you need a booster seat to see over the table? Jinx giggled, but it was a high, manic sound that made the nearby workers shift nervously. You're funny, she said, her voice sing-song. I like funny, but you know what's funnier? Her grin widened as she swung her minigun into position. Watching you scream, Smeech didn't flinch, his mechanical limbs hissing as he leaned closer. Careful, little girl. You might hurt yourself. Naruto held up a hand, stopping Jinx before she could fire. His glowing blue eyes locked on his Smeech's with an icy intensity. We're not here to play games, he said, his voice low and steady. Silco wants your loyalty. Are you going to cooperate? Or are we going to have a problem? Smeech laughed, a grating, high-pitched sound that echoed through the chamber. Loyalty? To Silco? Please. I don't take orders from anyone, least of all a brat with a glowing night light for a chest. Naruto stepped back, his expression unreadable. Jinx, he said simply. The air seemed to crackle with energy as Jinx burst into action, her laughter filling the chamber as she fired her minigun into the ceiling. Bullets ricocheted wildly, sending sparks flying and workers diving for cover. Oops, Jinx giggled, swinging her weapon toward a cluster of workers cowering behind a pile of scrap. Better move, or you'll get squished. Smeech growled, his mechanical limbs clanking as he pointed a clawed finger at her. Enough. You think you can come into my domain? And he didn't get a finish. Naruto moved like a blur, closing the distance between them in an instant. His glowing blue eyes flared as he grabbed Smeech's mechanical leg and twisted it sharply. The sound of snapping metal filled the air, followed by Smeech's scream as he collapsed to the ground. Naruto loomed over Smeech, his glowing eyes cold and unrelenting. Sparks erupted from the broken limb, and Smeech clawed at the ground with his mechanical hands, trying to pull himself upright. This is a warning, Naruto said, his voice calm but deadly. You fall in line with Silco, where you lose a lot more than your legs. Smeech glared up at him, his face twisted with pain and fury. You. Jinx appeared beside Naruto, her grin manic as she leaned down to look Smeech in the eye. Or we'll just kill you, she chirped, her voice sing-song. Right, Ruto? Naruto glanced at her, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. Yeah, what she said. Smeech growled low in his throat, his mechanical claws digging into the ground. But as Naruto's glowing eyes bore into his, the fight drained from him. He knew he couldn't win. Fine, Smeech spat, his voice trembling with rage. You win. I'll fall in line. Naruto stepped back, his glowing eyes dimming slightly. Jinx lingered, twirling a grenade in her hand as she leaned closer to Smeech. Next time, she whispered, her tone dripping with menace, I won't miss. She skipped after Naruto, leaving Smeech crumpled on the ground, his workers too afraid to help him. As they left the scrapyard, Jinx glanced at Naruto, her mismatched eyes sparkling with excitement. Did you see his face? She laughed. Priceless. We should do this more often. Naruto smirked faintly, his hood shadowing his face. If they keep causing problems, we will. Jinx grinned, her energy infectious as they disappeared into the shadows of Zaun. Naruto and Jinx walked side by side through the winding alleys of Zaun, their footsteps echoing faintly in the quiet night. The path to Jinx's lair was second nature to them, now a twisted journey through the shadowy remnants of the Undercity. Jinx hummed an off-key tune as she skipped slightly ahead, twirling her minigun like a toy. Another one bites the dust, she giggled, glancing over her shoulder at Naruto. Think Silco'll throw us a party for finishing up with Smeech? Naruto smirked faintly, his glowing eyes flickering in the dim light. If we're lucky, he'll just let us sleep in. Jinx cackled at that, her mismatched eyes gleaming. Sleep's boring. I want to blow something up again. Naruto shook his head, but didn't reply. As chaotic as she could be, there was something about Jinx's energy that he found oddly grounding, her presence a constant in the storm of his own fractured memories. But then they heard a strange, faint whirring sound, growing louder with each passing second. Both of them stopped in their tracks, their senses immediately on high alert. You hear that? Jinx whispered, her voice losing its usual playful edge. Naruto nodded, his glowing eyes narrowing as he scanned the shadows. Yeah, before either of them could react, a smoke bomb hissed and exploded nearby, filling the alley with a thick, choking fog. The acrid smell burned Naruto's nostrils, and his instincts kicked in as he moved to shield Jinx. "Company," he muttered, his voice low. The sound of whirring grew louder, and through the haze, they saw them figures on hoverboards, their silhouettes darting in and out of the fog like ghosts. Their faces were obscured by masks, and they moved with an eerie precision, their glowing boards casting strange shadows against the walls. Jinx's grin returned, sharp and feral. "Finally, some fun," she cried, swinging her minigun into position. She opened fire without hesitation, the alley erupting in a cacophony of gunfire and sparks. The masked assailants moved quickly, dodging her bullets with an agility that only seemed to fuel her excitement. "Oh, you guys are fast. I like it," she laughed, firing wildly. Amid the chaos, one of the masked figures dismounted from his hoverboard. He moved with a deliberate calm, a stopwatch in hand, its ticking somehow audible even over the noise. His posture was confident but unassuming, his mask hiding any expression. Naruto's glowing eyes locked onto him. There was something different about this one. The figure eyed Naruto with a curious intensity. "I've been watching you for a while," he said, his voice muffled but calm. "You and your partner." Naruto's expression remained unreadable. "Hope you like what you've seen." The man sighed, shaking his head. "You need to stop before more people get hurt." Naruto tilted his head slightly, his glowing eyes narrowing. "No one gets hurt unless they make it happen themselves." The man's gaze shifted briefly to Jinx, who was still gleefully mowing down their attackers. Though his mask obscured his face, there was a palpable sadness in his posture. "This isn't going to end well for either of you," he said, his tone heavy with meaning. Naruto clenched his fists, his energy sparking faintly. "We'll see about that." The man clicked his stopwatch and lunged toward Naruto, his movements a blur. Naruto barely dodged the first attack, the speed and precision catching him off guard. He pivoted to counter, but the masked man evaded with ease, his movements fluid and calculated. "That's a first," Naruto muttered, his eyes narrowing. The man dodged another strike, his tone calm and almost apologetic. "Your power is temporary," he said simply. "You're playing with something you don't understand." "Oh, really?" Naruto replied, his voice cold as he zapped behind the man in a burst of blue energy. He swung, but the man dodged again, his movements precise and unrelenting. "Interesting," Naruto muttered, his frustration giving way to intrigue. Jinx, meanwhile, was reveling in the fight. She laughed wildly as she fired at another masked assailant, the force of her bullets sending him flying off his hoverboard. She stomped gleefully on the shattered board, turning her attention to the next target. One of the attackers moved toward her, but before he could strike, Naruto's energy flared, sending him crashing into a nearby wall. Jinx blew him a kiss. "Thanks, Naruto. You're the best." The leader watched the chaos unfold, his posture stiffening as one of his allies fell. He clicked his stopwatch again, the sound crisp and deliberate. "Enough," he said, his voice sharp. "Fall back." Naruto's glowing eyes flared as he stepped forward. "Running already?" The leader paused, his gaze locking on Naruto. "You're harder to take down than I realized," he admitted. "But this isn't over." He turned to Jinx, his voice softening slightly. "Especially for her." Jinx tilted her head, her grin faltering for a brief moment. "What's that supposed to mean?" The leader didn't answer. Instead, he signaled to his team, and the remaining attackers retreated on their hoverboards, disappearing into the night. The leader lingered for a moment, his posture tense. "We'll meet again," he said, his voice firm. "And when we do, I'll stop you." Naruto smirked, his energy crackling faintly. Looking forward to it, as the dust settled, Jinx twirled her minigun, her grin returning. "Well, that was fun. Who were those guys?" Naruto didn't answer immediately, his gaze fixed on the direction the attackers had fled. "Trouble," he said finally. Jinx laughed, slinging her weapon over her shoulder. "Trouble's my middle name. Let's see them try again." Naruto's smirk was faint, his glowing eyes dimming slightly. They will, as they continued toward Jinx's lair. The weight of the encounter lingered in the air. Naruto's thoughts were clouded, the leader's words replaying in his mind. The battle had left more questions than answers, and he couldn't shake the feeling that their paths were destined to cross again. The walk back to the last drop was quieter than usual. Naruto and Jinx moved through the darkened streets of Zon, the echoes of the earlier ambush still lingering in the air. Jinx hummed softly to herself, though the tune was uneven, her usual energy subdued. Naruto stayed silent, his glowing blue eyes scanning their surroundings out of habit. When they arrived at Silco's office, they found him seated at his desk, the glow of a single lamp casting long shadows across the room. Sevika was in the corner, her mechanical arm idly whirring as she polished it. She glanced at the duo as they entered, but said nothing, her expression unreadable. Silco looked up, his mismatched eyes narrowing slightly. "You're late. Ran into some trouble," Naruto said simply, pulling his hood back to reveal his glowing eyes. "Hoverboards, masks, smoke bombs. You know, the usual." Silco raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his chair. "Firelights," he muttered, more to himself than to them. "Persistent little pests." Jinx grinned, her eyes gleaming. "They were fun," she said, plopping down into a chair and swinging her legs. "One of them even had the nerve to talk down to us. Can you believe that?" Silco's gaze shifted to Naruto. And Naruto shrugged, his expression calm. They fell back. "But their leader, he's different. Quick, calculated." He paused, his glowing eyes narrowing slightly. "Said he's been watching us. Wants to stop us." Silco tapped his fingers against the desk, his expression contemplative. Did he succeed? Naruto's smirk was faint but confident. "No." Silco nodded slowly, a small, satisfied smile curling his lips. "Good. You handled yourselves well." Jinx beamed, leaning forward eagerly. "So what's next? More explosions? More bad guys to crush?" "Not tonight," Silco said, his tone firm. "You've done enough for one day. Rest. We'll deal with the firelights when the time comes." Jinx groaned dramatically but didn't argue, hopping out of the chair. Fine. But tomorrow I want more action." Naruto gave Silco a small nod before following Jinx out of the office, his thoughts still lingering on the masked leader and his cryptic words. The lair felt strangely quiet as they entered, the remnants of Jinx's latest tinkering scattered across the floor. Naruto watched as she kicked off her boots and flopped onto a worn couch, her minigun resting beside her. She was quiet for a moment, her mismatched eyes staring at the ceiling. "You did well today," Naruto said, breaking the silence as he leaned against a nearby wall. Silco was impressed. Jinx didn't respond immediately. Instead, she fiddled with a small gadget, her fingers moving almost absently. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, almost hesitant. "Do you think he's right?" she asked, not looking at him. "That we're just hurting people?" Naruto frowned slightly, his glowing eyes dimming. Jinx, for a moment, the playful mask she always wore seemed to slip. Her expression softened, her gaze distant, and for just a second, she looked like someone else, like powder. "It's stupid," she muttered, shaking her head as if to rid herself of the thought. Her usual grin returned, though it was weaker than before. "Forget I said anything." Naruto crossed the room and sat beside her, his gaze steady. "You did well today," he repeated, his tone gentle. "And you should be proud." She glanced at him, her grin faltering as her mismatched eyes searched his face. "You mean that?" Naruto nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah, you're stronger than you think." Jinx hesitated before leaning against him, her usual bravado fading as she rested her head on his shoulder. Naruto wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. For a moment, the chaos and violence of their lives felt distant, replaced by a quiet, fragile peace. As the night deepened, Jinx eventually slipped away, muttering something about needing to tinker with her dreams. Naruto followed, his own exhaustion finally catching up to him. Jinx had crawled into her makeshift bed, surrounded by her collection of tools, trinkets, and chaos. She stared at the ceiling, fiddling absently with a small piece of scrap metal in her hands. Her usual manic energy had ebbed away, leaving a rare moment of stillness. As Naruto settled nearby, leaning against the wall as he watched her with a protective gaze. "Good night, Ruto," she mumbled, her voice soft and almost childlike. Naruto glanced at her, his voice soft as he spoke. "Good night, Powder." The piece of scrap metal fell from her hands, clattering softly to the floor. She turned her head sharply, her eyes narrowing. "It's Jinx," she said, her tone biting. "Remember?" Naruto winced slightly, but his gaze didn't waver. "Right, Jinx," he murmured, correcting himself. For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy and unspoken. Then, her features softened just barely as she let out a quiet sigh. "Don't forget it," she muttered, turning away and pulling a blanket over herself. Naruto's expression remained unreadable as he leaned his head back against the wall, his thoughts swirling. He hadn't meant to say it, but in that fleeting moment, the name Powder had felt like a glimpse of someone else, a part of Jinx she kept hidden, even from herself. "Good night, Jinx," he said softly, the weight of the name sinking into the quiet room. "Good night, Naruto," she mumbled back, her voice tinged with something unreadable. As her breathing evened out, Naruto let his eyes close, his own exhaustion finally catching up to him. Despite everything, the fights, the danger, the confusion of who they had been and who they were now, this moment, fragile and fleeting, was enough for now. They were still together, and for Naruto, that was all that mattered. The air in Zon was heavy and oppressive, a mix of smog and the sharp tang of industrial waste. In the dimly lit labyrinth of its underground streets, shadows stretched long, masking the movements of those who thrived in the city's underbelly. Among them, a group of thugs scurried away with a stolen shipment of shimmer, their laughter echoing off the walls as they reveled in their perceived victory. "Didn't think it'd be that easy," one of them chuckled, hoisting a crate over his shoulder. "Those idiots guarding this stuff didn't even see us coming." Another thug smirked, lighting a cigarette with a shaky hand. "Yeah, but let's not stick around. They'll notice soon enough." Their banter was interrupted by the sound of a crate being set down abruptly. One of the men, taller than the rest and more cautious, turned his head sharply toward a dark alleyway nearby. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, and his hand drifted instinctively to the knife at his belt. "Something's wrong," he muttered, his eyes narrowing as he stared into the abyss of the alley. "Someone's there." The others groaned, rolling their eyes. "Stop being paranoid, Gene," one of them scoffed. "It's just the shadows." "No," Gene snapped, his voice shaking. "He's here." The group followed his gaze reluctantly, squinting into the darkness. For a moment, there was nothing, only silence and the faint sound of dripping water. But then a pair of glowing blue eyes pierced the shadows, their intensity like a predator watching its prey. The thugs froze, their confidence replaced by cold dread. "Seek him out," Gene shouted, his bravado faltering. The others laughed nervously, trying to mask their unease. "You're imagining things, man. Let's just—" Before he could finish, a figure emerged from the darkness with terrifying speed. The boy moved like a shadow given form, his blonde hair catching the faint light as he descended upon them. The first thug went down with a sickening crunch, his cry cut short by a swift punch to the throat. The others scrambled, drawing weapons, but it was futile. The boy was relentless, his movements precise and brutal. Gene watched in horror as his companions were dispatched one by one, their cries of pain echoing through the narrow street. Finally, he turned to run, panic fueling his steps as he shouted, "It's him, the blue-eyed demon of Zon." But it was too late. The boy caught him effortlessly, slamming him into the wall with enough force to crack the bricks. Gene whimpered, clutching at the boy's arm as he looked into those unyielding blue eyes, glowing with an eerie light. "You decided to steal from us," Naruto said, his voice calm, almost casual. "That's not how things work." Please," Gene begged, tears streaming down his face. "I didn't mean—" "Shoo," Naruto interrupted, tilting his head. "Today's progress day. I'm running late, and you've wasted enough of my time. So, I'll keep this simple." As he leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Since you stole from us, it's only fair. I break your legs in return. Fair trade, right? Jin's screams echoed through the alley as a sickening snap rang out, followed by a thud as his body crumpled to the ground. Naruto straightened, adjusting his hood and turning his gaze upward. As he stepped out of the alley, he pulled his hood down, revealing his golden blonde hair and sharp features. He looked up at the polluted sky, the faint glow of Piltover's lights just visible through the haze. A hint of a smirk played on his lips as he muttered to himself, I better get back to Powder. He paused, his smirk fading slightly. No, not Powder, he corrected himself. She hates that now. Jinx. The names lingered in the air as he walked away, his figure blending back into Zaun's labyrinthine streets. The blue-eyed demon of Zaun had work to do, and Progress Day waited for no one. Near the heart of the festival, the Kiraman family tent stood as a beacon of sophistication, showcasing some of Piltover's finest advancements. Mrs. Cassandra Kiraman introduced her famous protégé to a small gathering of attendees. Jace Talus stood beside her, his demeanor polished, but with a hint of discomfort under the weight of such praise. Jace has been instrumental in shaping the future of Hextech, Mrs. Kierman said, gesturing toward him. We are privileged to have supported his ground-breaking work. Jace smiled politely, shaking hands with the gathered crowd, but his attention drifted. Spotting a familiar figure standing at the edge of the tent, he excused himself with a quick, if you'll pardon me. He approached Caitlin Kierman, who stood in her enforcer uniform, her rifle slung across her back as she kept a watchful eye on the bustling crowd. Caitlin, Jace greeted with a grin. Keeping the festival safe from overenthusiastic inventors, I see. She rolled her eyes, though a small smile tugged at her lips. Hardly. Mother thought assigning me to guard duty here would be the safest option away from anything remotely dangerous. Jace leaned against a nearby railing, crossing his arms. Ah. So the great Caitlin Kierman is babysitting her family's tent? Doesn't exactly scream thrilling enforcer work. Don't remind me, Caitlin muttered. Progress Day is supposed to celebrate innovation and progress. Instead, I'm stuck playing the obedient daughter. Jace chuckled, but before he could respond, his Hextech communicator crackled softly, signaling his attention was needed elsewhere. He gave Caitlin a wink. Well, if you need a break from all the excitement, you know where to find me. As he walked away, Caitlin shook her head, her faint smile fading as she scanned the festival with renewed focus. Though her post was dull, her instincts told her to remain vigilant. Far from the bustling festival, on a secluded airship dock, Silco's operations continued under the cover of shadows. Sevica oversaw the preparation of a large shipment of shimmer, the volatile substance packed into crates and barrels. Henchmen moved quickly, their work efficient but tense. Move it along, Sevica barked, her mechanical arm glinting under the dim light. We've got a schedule to keep. Just as the last crate was secured, a faint hum echoed from above. The henchmen froze, their heads snapping upward. From the misty darkness, masked figures descended on sleek hoverboards, their movements swift and precise. The firelights had arrived. The gang of vigilantes struck with practiced coordination, deploying amber-colored grenades that exploded on impact, releasing clouds of shimmering gas. The henchmen and Sevica are caught within were encased in hardened amber shells, immobilized but unharmed. The firelight leader landed gracefully on the deck, their stopwatch already ticking in their hand. Their mask concealed their features, but their voice carried authority. These will hold for 5 minutes, they said, nodding toward the amber-encased Sevica and her henchmen. The leader moved toward the stockpile of shimmer, inspecting the crates with a critical eye. Silco's expanding, they muttered, almost to themselves. Too much shimmer for just Zaun. He's pushing into Piltover. Another firelight approached, their hoverboard thrumming softly. Orders, boss? The leader's voice turned sharp. Burn it all. Check below deck for more. The firelights dispersed, their hoverboards carrying them swiftly as they began planting incendiary charges on the shimmer crates. The masked vigilantes worked with precision, their goal clear to disrupt Silco's growing operations. Two firelights descended cautiously into the dimly lit hold of the ship, their hoverboards powered down to avoid detection. The air was heavy with the acrid scent of shimmer, the volatile substance stacked in crates around them. One of them, a younger member with quick reflexes, glanced at the door behind them as it creaked shut. "Tripwire," they muttered under their breath, too late to stop it. The door slammed shut with a resounding clang, locking them inside. Both firelights froze as a faint mechanical hum filled the air. Their eyes darted to the door, now bearing a crude drawing of a grinning monkey. Recognition dawned on them simultaneously. "It's her," one whispered. "Jinx." Before they could react, a second device activated with a sharp click. A doll, grotesquely stitched together, dropped from the ceiling and dangled in front of them, its unsettling eyes swiveling to lock onto them. Wires extended from the doll, attaching to several grenades strapped to their bodies. They barely had time to scream. The explosion tore through the hold, rattling the ship and sending a plume of fire and smoke up through the cracks in the deck above. The Firelight's attempt to sabotage the shimmer had been brutally shut down. As Jinx emerged onto the top deck, her manic laughter cutting through the chaos like a knife. Her wide, unblinking eyes scanned the Firelights who remained, her famous pistol glinting in her hand. She moved with an erratic grace, her every step exuding danger. The Firelights regrouped, trying to salvage their mission, but Jinx was a whirlwind of destruction. She dispatched two of them with well-placed shots, their bodies crumpling to the deck. Another Firelight attempted to light the shimmer with a flare, but Jinx appeared behind her, grabbing her arm and pistol whipping her with brutal efficiency. The Firelight's mask came loose, clattering to the ground. Jinx froze, her wide eyes narrowing as she took in the girl's pink hair and striking resemblance to Vi. The world around her seemed to slow, the sound of the battle fading into a haunting silence as memories surged forward Vi's face, her voice, her betrayal. The flare slipped from the Firelight's grasp, teetering dangerously close to the shimmer. But before the flames could catch, Naruto appeared, sliding in to grab the flare and extinguish it with a swift motion. He tossed it aside, his calm demeanor a sharp contrast to the chaos around him. "Careful, Jinx," Naruto said, standing between her and the Firelight. "We don't want this whole thing going up, do we?" Jinx didn't respond, her mind still trapped in the haze of her memories. The Firelight, sensing the opportunity, broke free of Jinx's loosened grip and scrambled backward. Jinx snapped out of her stupor, raising her pistol. With a wild, almost feral grin, she fired. The bolt hit the girl squarely in the chest, sending her sprawling to the ground, lifeless. "No!" The Firelight leader's voice broke through the air, filled with anguish. He rushed to the girl's side, shaking her gently. When she didn't move, his fingers tightened into fists. He glanced at his stopwatch. It was almost up, but grief and rage overwhelmed his sense of time. Snarling, the leader lunged at Jinx, but before he could reach her, Naruto stepped in. With a swift motion, he delivered a sharp kick to the man's ribs, sending him staggering back. Naruto tilted his head, his glowing blue eyes narrowing as he sized up the Firelight leader. "You feel so familiar," he said, almost casually. A smirk tugged at his lips. "We need to stop running into each other like this." The leader, despite his pain, readied himself for another attack. But another Firelight called out from above, their voice urgent. "We have to leave. Now." With a reluctant glare, the leader nodded. The Firelights activated their hoverboards and began to retreat, lifting into the air. Jinx, still vibrating with erratic energy, grabbed her minigun and unleashed a torrent of bullets after them. Her shots riddled the ship's hull with holes and hitting some of Saika's men, but the Firelights escaped unscathed, vanishing into the clouds. As silence returned to the deck, Sevika emerged, her mechanical arm covered in soot from breaking free of the amber crystals. Her face was twisted in anger as she approached Jinx. "You nearly lost everything," Sevika snarled, gesturing to the damaged crates of shimmer. "If it wasn't for Naruto, we'd have nothing left." Naruto, leaning casually against a crate, grinned. "That's why I'm here, Sevika." to keep things manageable. He placed a hand on Jinx's shoulder, giving it a reassuring squeeze. She's fine. We still have the shipment. Jinx looked at Naruto, her manic energy fading slightly. Her lips twitched into a small, rare smile as she muttered, "Yeah, thanks, Naruto." Sevika scoffed, muttering curses under her breath as she walked off to inspect the remaining crates. Naruto watched her go, then turned back to Jinx, his expression softening. "You okay?" he asked gently. Jinx nodded, her fingers brushing against the shock pistol at her side. "Yeah, I'm fine." Jace's lab hummed with energy as the newly developed Hextech devices were neatly arranged on a workbench. Blue light from the fortified hex crystals illuminated the room, casting an ethereal glow on the walls. Victor stood beside Jace, his posture rigid, but his expression alight with anticipation. Today was the day they would present their advancements to Heimerdinger. The faint sound of footsteps signaled the arrival of their guest. Heimerdinger stepped into the room, his small form dwarfed by the towering shelves and equipment around him. His gaze immediately fell on the glowing hex crystals, curiosity flickering in his wise eyes. "Ah, Jace, Victor," Heimerdinger greeted, his voice carrying its usual blend of warmth and authority. "I trust you've called me here to showcase something remarkable." "We think you'll be impressed, Professor," Jace replied, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "This is our latest breakthrough." Jace gestured toward the workbench, where a smooth, marble-like hex crystal rested inside a fortified casing. Unlike the raw, volatile crystals that had caused so much destruction in the past, this one appeared stable, radiating a soft, controlled glow. "This is our newly fortified hex crystal," Jace explained. "We've refined its structure, smoothing its energy output, and ensuring it's completely safe to handle. It can withstand extreme forces without destabilizing." Heimerdinger approached the crystal, his bushy brows furrowing in thought as he studied it closely. "A marvel," he murmured, "and a necessary step forward given the dangers posed by the raw crystals. But tell me, what applications do you envision for such a stabilized source?" Victor stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with excitement as he picked up a pair of heavy gauntlets from the bench. "These are the Atlas gauntlets," he said, his voice steady but filled with enthusiasm. "Designed for miners, they provide strength enough to crush boulders and move debris safely. A tool of empowerment." Jace added, "They're not just for miners, though. These gauntlets could assist enforcers, construction workers, anyone who needs additional strength." Heimerdinger nodded slowly, his fingers brushing over the gauntlet's surface. "Impressive," he admitted, "and the hex crystal stability allows for this power to be harnessed without significant risk." "Exactly," Jace confirmed. "The crystal's energy output is moderated, ensuring it remains safe even under heavy use." Victor then reached for another device, a sleek mechanical arm equipped with a rotating claw and a mounted laser. He held it up for Heimerdinger to see. "This is the Hex Claw. It's designed to assist artificers with precise tasks, cutting through materials or assembling complex components. Imagine the possibilities for artisans, engineers, anyone who creates." Heimerdinger's expression remained thoughtful as he examined the devices. "The ingenuity here is undeniable. These tools could revolutionize how we work, how we build, how we live." Jace and Victor exchanged a hopeful glance, but their excitement dimmed as Heimerdinger continued. "However," Heimerdinger said, turning to face them, "such power in the wrong hands could lead to disaster. Even with these safeguards, the potential for misuse cannot be ignored. You've taken an important step, but these technologies need refinement, rigorous testing, safeguards that go beyond what you've shown me today." "How long are we talking, Professor?" Jace asked carefully, though he already feared the answer. Heimerdinger stroked his whiskers thoughtfully. "A decade at least. The stabilization of the crystals is an achievement, but ensuring the safety of these devices in uncontrolled environments will take time. Rushing their release would be irresponsible." Victor's expression hardened, his excitement giving way to frustration. "A decade," he echoed, his voice tinged with disbelief. "People need help now. These devices could save lives, improve lives wide away." Heimerdinger's gaze softened, but his tone was firm. Because, Victor, history has shown us what happens when we rush progress. Tools become weapons. Advancements become tragedies. I admire your eagerness to help, but patience is the foundation of true progress. Victor said nothing, his jaw tightening as he looked back at the hex claw in his hands. Jace placed a hand on his shoulder, a silent gesture of support, though he too felt the sting of Heimerdinger's caution. "I understand your concerns, Professor," Jace said diplomatically, "and I agree that safety must come first. But please consider how much good we could do, how many lives we could improve if we find a way to expedite this process." Heimerdinger sighed, stepping back. "I will review your findings further, but my stance remains. These devices show great promise, but they are not ready for Piltover or the world." As Heimerdinger left the lab, the room fell into silence. Victor turned back to the workbench, his frustration evident as he began tinkering with the hex claw again. "He's wrong," Victor muttered under his breath. "We can't wait 10 years. The people in Zon, in Piltover, they need this now." Jace hesitated, torn between his loyalty to Heimerdinger's wisdom and his growing agreement with Victor's urgency. "We'll find a way," he said finally. "But we have to do this right." Victor didn't respond, his focus consumed by the claw in his hands. The tension between ambition and caution hung heavy in the air. The airship hung precariously above the Zonite docks, its hull riddled with bullet holes and scorch marks. The aftermath of the Firelight attack had left it a ruin, now surrounded by enforcers who worked to secure the area. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and shimmer, and the occasional creak of the damaged ship was a haunting reminder of the chaos that had unfolded. Caitlin moved cautiously through the shadows, her enforcer uniform blending into the dim light. She had slipped away from her assigned post at the Progress Day Festival, following the rumors of an incident at the docks. Now, here she was, sneaking aboard the nearly destroyed airship. Caitlin climbed onto the deck, her rifle slung across her back and her camera in hand. She clicked the shutter repeatedly, capturing the scorched hull and the telltale amber shards left by the Firelight's grenades. Every detail mattered, and her sharp eyes missed nothing. The deck was a mess, shattered crates, spilled shimmer, and dried bloodstains painting a grim picture. Caitlin's instincts told her this was more than a botched robbery. There was intent here, precision in the destruction. But why? Her attention was drawn to a faint trail of blood leading below deck. Tightening her grip on her rifle, she descended into the dimly lit hold. The air was colder here, damp and thick with the metallic tang of blood. She followed the trail until she found him, a Zonite henchman, slumped against a pile of crates, his breathing shallow and labored. The man's wound was fresh, blood seeping through his makeshift bandages. Caitlin knelt beside him, pulling a claw from her belt to press against the injury. The man groaned in pain, his eyes fluttering open. "You're lucky to be alive," Caitlin said evenly, her voice low but firm. "That shot should have killed you." The henchman tried to pull away, but he was too weak. Caitlin leaned closer, her tone softening slightly. "Tell me what happened here. Who did this?" He muttered something incoherent, his head lolling to the side. Caitlin shook him gently, keeping the pressure on his wound. "Stay with me. Who attacked you? Was it the Firelights? Who were they working against?" The man's lips parted, but before he could answer, the sound of heavy boots echoed from above. Caitlin tensed, her heart sinking as Marcus, now Piltover sheriff, entered the hold with a squad of enforcers. Well, Marcus said, his tone dripping with irritation. "What do we have here?" Caitlin stood, squaring her shoulders. "I'm investigating. This man might have information about the attack." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "You're supposed to be guarding your family's tent, Kierman, not interfering in active crime scenes." "This is bigger than guard duty," Caitlin shot back, her voice firm. "This was a coordinated attack on a Shimmer shipment. If we want to stop these kinds of incidents, we need to understand who's behind them." Marcus stepped closer, his imposing figure looming over her. "Understand this, Kierman. You're overstepping your authority. Again, you've been warned about this." Caitlin's jaw tightened, but she held her ground. "And you're ignoring the bigger picture. This isn't just about Shimmer. Something else is happening here, and you know it. Marcus's expression darkened, his frustration evident. That's enough. Officers, take him to Stillwater Prison. Two enforcers moved forward, lifting the wounded henchman onto a stretcher. Caitlin opened her mouth to protest, but Marcus cut her off. "You're done here," he said coldly. "Graveyard shift. Effective immediately." Caitlin clenched her fists, her frustration bubbling beneath the surface, but she said nothing. She had no choice but to comply for now. She watched as the enforcers carried the wounded man away, the opportunity for answers slipping through her fingers. The last drop was no longer the grimy, rough around the edges bar it had been under Vander's control. Under Silco's reign, it had transformed into a raucous nightclub, pulsing with chaotic energy. Music blared, neon lights painted the walls in vibrant hues, and Zonites from every corner gathered to drink, scheme, and forget their troubles. Sevica stormed through the crowd, her mechanical arm clenching and unclenching as frustration radiated from her like heat. She shoved open the door to Silco's private office, where the man himself sat in his high-backed chair, swirling a glass of amber liquid. "You need to get her under control," Sevica snapped, not bothering with pleasantries. "That girl nearly lost us the shipment. If it weren't for Naruto." Silco held up a hand, his expression calm, but his tone cutting. "If it weren't for Naruto, you'd have nothing to bring back but excuses." Sevica's jaw clenched, but Silco continued before she could retort. "You oversaw the operation, Sevica. It was your responsibility to ensure everything went smoothly. Don't blame Jinx for your failure." Sevica's mechanical arm twitched, sparks flying as her frustration reached its peak. "She's unstable, Silco. She's a liability." And yet, Silco said smoothly, setting down his glass, "She gets results. As does Naruto. It's you, Sevica, who should consider how close you came to losing everything tonight." Her lips pressed into a thin line, and with a growl of frustration, Sevica turned and stormed out of the office. The door slammed behind her, the sound echoing through the room. Silco sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "You can come down now, Jinx." From the rafters above, Jinx dropped down with practiced ease, landing in a crouch before standing to face Silco. She crossed her arms, her expression defiant but troubled. "I didn't mess up, Silco. She just doesn't get it." Silco gestured for her to speak. "Then explain it to me." Jinx hesitated, glancing to the side. Her fingers twitched nervously as she muttered. "There was a girl. Pink hair. She reminded me of..." She didn't finish, but Silco understood. "Bye," he said quietly, watching as Jinx flinched at the name. "You froze, didn't you?" "I didn't freeze." Jinx snapped, her voice rising. "I handled it. She's gone now. Problem solved." "Problem solved?" Silco echoed, leaning forward in his chair. "And yet, here you are, still haunted by the past." Jinx's fists clenched, her whole body tense. "I don't care about her anymore. I don't care about any of them. They left me. This is my family now." Silco studied her for a long moment before nodding. "Good. Then stop letting them live rent-free in your mind. Sevica will clean up today's mess. You take some time off, focus on your gadgets, and clear your head." "I don't need time off," Jinx shouted, spinning on her heel and storming toward the door. "I don't need any of this." Silco sighed again, watching as the door slammed behind her. "Teenagers," he muttered under his breath. Naruto appeared in the doorway moments later, his hands in his pockets, and his expression unreadable. "You wanted to see me?" Silco nodded, motioning for Naruto to step inside. "How was the job?" Naruto shrugged. "Handled. Shipments intact, minus the drama." Silco raised an eyebrow. "Drama?" "Sevica and Jinx. Same old story." Naruto leaned against the wall, his blue eyes glowing faintly as he met Silco's gaze. "I stopped the flare, kept the shipment safe." "You're welcome." "Efficient as always," Silco said with a small smirk. "That's why I trust you." Naruto nodded, pushing off the wall. "If that's all, I should catch up with Jinx before she gets into more trouble." "Of course," Silco said, waving him off. "Go." As Naruto disappeared down the hall, Silco leaned back in his chair, his expression darkening as he let his thoughts wander. The news he had uncovered not long ago lingered in his mind. Naruto Uzumaki. Silco murmured to himself, the name carrying weight he rarely allowed himself to acknowledge. Son of the famous Minato and Kushina Uzumaki, the golden boy of Piltover. He swirled his drink absently, his sharp mind piecing together what he knew. It was almost poetic, the way life had unfolded for the boy. Raised in privilege, shattered by tragedy, and now here as the blue-eyed demon of Zaun's underworld, fiercely loyal only to Jinx. Silco tilted his head, considering the implications. If Naruto were to learn the truth, would he care? The boy he knew now seemed indifferent to the world he had left behind, focused entirely on protecting Jinx and carving out his place in Zaun. And yet, Silco mused aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. Trauma has a way of twisting the heart. You never know what memories might resurface or what they might mean. He took a slow sip of his drink, his sharp eyes narrowing as he stared into the middle distance. Whatever the future held for Naruto Uzumaki, Silco intended to remain one step ahead. Jinx's lair was as chaotic and unorthodox as its owner. The remnants of a massive airship engine hung precariously over a cavernous fissure, its metallic skeleton adorned with bright, mismatched lights, scattered tools, and strange contraptions in various stages of completion. Neon graffiti painted the walls, swirling colors and designs that clashed with the rusted surfaces. It was a place as erratic and unpredictable as Jinx herself. She stormed into the space, her boots clanging loudly on the metal flooring. Her shock pistol clattered onto a nearby workbench as she threw it with a frustrated growl. Her fingers twitched with pent-up energy, her mind racing with thoughts that she couldn't quite piece together. Silco thinks I'm weak now, Jinx muttered to the dimly lit room, pacing back and forth. Like I can't handle myself. Like I need time off. Time off? Huh. I don't need time off. I need them to see I'm not a screw-up. She stopped in front of two crude effigies, cobbled together from spare parts, fabric, and wires. Milo's effigy had a mocking smirk drawn on its face, while Claggor's bore a kind, blank expression. They hung from chains, swaying slightly as if they were silently judging her. I didn't screw up, Jinx yelled, pointing a trembling finger at Milo's effigy. You always thought I'd screw everything up, but I handled it. That pink-haired girl? Gone. Poof. Problem solved. Her voice softened as she turned to Claggor's effigy. I didn't mean to mess up, okay? She reminded me of... She trailed off, biting her lip and looking away. The effigies, of course, offered no response. Jinx stared at them for a long moment before letting out a frustrated sigh and throwing herself into a worn chair. Her knee bounced nervously as she stared at the ceiling, her thoughts tumbling in a chaotic mess. Slowly, her expression shifted. The frustration in her eyes gave way to a flicker of excitement as an idea began to take shape in her mind. She sat up straighter, her hands moving instinctively to grab a pencil and a piece of paper from her cluttered workbench. I'll show them, she muttered, her voice rising with growing enthusiasm. I'll show them all. Silco, Sevica, everyone. They'll see what I can do. Her pencil danced across the paper, sketching out shapes and designs as she murmured to herself. Something big, something unforgettable. No one's going to think I'm weak after this. As she worked, her mood lifted. Her thoughts became more focused, her chaotic energy channeled into the creation of something extraordinary and dangerous. She hummed a tune under her breath, a jagged melody that filled the space as she added details to her schematics. Hours later, Jinx leaned back, surveying her work with a triumphant grin. The designs on the paper were intricate, filled with notes and diagrams that only she could decipher. Whatever she was planning, it was bold, ambitious, and likely catastrophic. She stood, holding the paper up to the light. They'll remember this forever, she said, her voice tinged with both excitement and menace. No more doubts. No more questions. I'm Jinx, and I'm unstoppable. Her laughter echoed through the lair, wild and unrestrained. The effigies of Milo and Claggor swayed gently in the background, silent witnesses to her manic determination. As the glow of her neon graffiti bathed the lair in vibrant colors, Jinx began gathering materials for her latest creation, her mind focused and her resolve unshakable. She would prove herself no matter what it took. Hunched over her workbench, oblivious to the world around her, sparks flew as she welded pieces of metal together, her focus razor-sharp. The schematics she had sketched earlier were sprawled out before her, and she worked feverishly, her hands a blur of motion. Behind her, unnoticed, Naruto leaned casually against the wall, his glowing blue eyes fixed on her. His expression was unreadable, though his presence carried a sense of calm vigilance. He had grown used to her bouts of hyperfocus, her manic energy. It was part of who she was, and while others might find it exhausting or frustrating, Naruto had come to accept it. "Is it gonna work?" he asked suddenly, his voice cutting through the sound of her tools. Jinx froze mid-motion, her head snapping up as she whipped around to face him. For a moment, she looked startled, but the shock quickly gave way to a grin. "How long have you been standing there?" she asked, her voice teasing as she set her tools down. "Long enough to know you're up to something," Naruto replied, his tone even. He straightened and took a step closer, his hands casually tucked into his pockets. "Where do you think you're going, anyway?" Jinx's grin widened, and she pointed upward, her finger tracing an imaginary path to the surface. "Up," she said simply, her eyes glinting with mischief. Naruto sighed, running a hand through his blonde hair. "Jinx, you know that's a terrible idea, right?" "It's always a terrible idea," she said with a laugh, brushing past him to grab her pistol and sling it onto her hip. "But that's never stopped you from following me before, has it? And you're predictable." Jinx shot back, sticking her tongue out as she moved toward the exit. "Small? Slowpoke. We got work to do." Naruto watched her go, his smile fading as his expression grew more serious. He didn't know what she was planning, but he could see the determination in her every move. Whatever was driving her this time, it was important to her, and that meant it was important to him. She was the only constant in his life, the only person he trusted completely. No matter where she went or what chaos she dragged him into, he would follow her. He always had, and he always would. With a resigned sigh, Naruto pushed off the wall and followed Jinx up the rickety staircase that led out of the lair. "You know," he said as they climbed, "one of these days your plans are going to get us killed." Jinx glanced back at him, her grin unwavering. "Then we'll go out with a bang." Naruto chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Yeah, I figured you'd say that." The cocktail party was in full swing, the room filled with Piltover's elite. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over the gathering, and the hum of polite laughter and clinking glasses created an air of opulence. On a tall balcony overlooking the city, Mel stood alone, her sharp eyes scanning the skyline. She swirled the wine in her glass absent-mindedly, her posture graceful yet tense. Alora approached her, her movements deliberate and her tone light as she asked, "Tired of mingling already?" Mel let out a soft sigh, not bothering to turn. "The only person here worth my time is Jace," she replied, her voice tinged with both impatience and amusement. As if summoned, Jace appeared behind them, his expression polite but earnest. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Mel turned, her expression brightening slightly as she nodded to Alora. "If you'll excuse us." Alora gave a knowing smile and walked away, leaving Jace and Mel alone. Jace hesitated for a moment before gesturing toward a nearby door. "Can we talk in private?" The pair headed towards Mel's study, inside lined with shelves of rare books and adorned with intricate Piltoverian artifacts. Jace stood near the center of the room, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "Heimerdinger thinks the inventions Victor and I have been working on need more time." Jace began, his voice strained. "He says they aren't ready, that they could be dangerous." Mel tilted her head, watching him with her characteristic sharpness. "And do you agree?" Jace paused, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. "I don't know," he admitted. "That's why I'm here. I need your advice." Mel stepped closer, her voice steady and confident. "Jace, the people of Piltover thrive on vision. Progress Day isn't just a celebration, it's a stage for innovation. Investors and representatives from across the world will be there, watching your every move. Give them a glimpse of the future. Jace frowned, doubt flickering in his eyes. But what if Heimerdinger's right? What if it's too soon? Mel placed a hand on his shoulder, her gaze intense. You've already changed this city with the Hex Gates. You've proven what you're capable of. This is your chance to show them that your vision doesn't stop there. Jace nodded slowly, her words sinking in. You're right, he said finally. Progress Day is the perfect time. The grand auditorium was packed with attendees from all corners of Piltover and beyond. The room buzzed with anticipation as Cassandra took the stage, her voice carrying effortlessly over the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, her tone polished and professional. It is my great honor to introduce Piltover's brightest innovator and the mind behind the Hex Gates, Jace Tallis. Rambunctious applause erupted as Jace stepped onto the stage, his polished demeanor masking the nerves bubbling beneath the surface. He paused, letting the crowd settle before beginning. When I was a boy, he started, I grew up as the son of a stonemason. My family worked hard, but like so many others, we struggled. We faced hardships that seemed insurmountable. He gestured to the room around him. And now, I stand before you, not as the boy who struggled, but as the creator of the Hex Gates, a tool that has brought prosperity and opportunity to Piltover. The audience listened intently, captivated by his journey. Behind the scenes, Victor prepared the stage for the unveiling of their latest inventions, carefully positioning the fortified hex crystals and prototype devices. Jace glanced toward Victor, who gave him a small, encouraging nod. But as Jace returned his attention to the crowd, doubt gnawed at him. The weight of Heimerdinger's warnings and his own uncertainty pressed heavily on his chest. I had planned to share something new with you today, Jace said, his voice faltering slightly. But the truth is, I'm not ready. The inventions Victor and I have been working on are promising, but they're not perfect. And I believe that progress should never come at the expense of safety. A ripple of disappointment passed through the crowd, murmurs breaking out among the attendees. Jace felt the sting of their reaction, but pressed on. However, he continued, his voice growing stronger, I promise you this, what we are building will change lives. It will bring an end to the hardships we've all faced, and it will illuminate a future brighter than anything we've ever imagined. Piltover's future is bright. It begins with all of us. The crowd's applause returned, though it was more subdued than before. Jace stepped back, forcing a smile as he glanced toward the audience. In the distance, he noticed Mel and Alora rising from their seats and quietly leaving the room. Backstage, Jace found Victor, who was busy dismantling the setup for the presentation that never came. You made the right call, Victor said, though his voice lacked enthusiasm. Did I? Jace asked, his voice heavy with doubt. The crowd seemed disappointed. They'll forget, Victor replied, his focus on the prototype in his hands. What matters is that you didn't rush. We can't afford mistakes. Jace nodded, though his eyes lingered on the empty seats where Mel and Alora had been. Her words about giving people a glimpse of the future echoed in his mind, a reminder of the fine line between caution and ambition. As the lights dimmed in the auditorium, Jace couldn't help but wonder, had he held back too much? Or had he just saved Piltover from its own eagerness for progress? Only time would tell. The moon hung high over Piltover, casting a silvery glow over the empty festival grounds. Caitlin sat with a group of enforcers on the steps of the Grand Capitol building, their laughter and banter echoing softly in the quiet night. The festival had ended hours ago, leaving only the faint remnants of celebration in the air. One of the enforcers nudged Caitlin playfully. So, Lady Kierman, how does a girl of your standing end up with the likes of us? Caitlin smirked, adjusting her rifle. Someone has to keep you lot in line. The others laughed, and one added, Careful, she might report us to her mother. Another chimed in, she probably has tea parties with the council before her shifts. Caitlin rolled her eyes, but smiled faintly. She was used to their teasing, but her sharp instincts kept her alert despite the light-hearted moment. She shifted her gaze to the horizon, her attention caught by the faint glow of fire in the distance. Fire! She shouted, standing abruptly. The group followed her gaze, their laughter fading as urgency set in. They scrambled to their feet, grabbing their gear and racing toward the rising flames. The fire consumed a small residential building, its windows glowing orange as smoke billowed into the night sky. The enforcers split into groups, some deploying portable extinguishers, while others began clearing nearby buildings to prevent the flames from spreading. A few ran to notify the fire brigade. From inside the building, the faint sound of a child's voice reached Caitlin's ears. It was weak and desperate, calling for help. "She's trapped in there," one of the enforcers shouted. Caitlin and another officer pushed their way through the smoke-filled entryway, their eyes scanning the interior. The voice grew louder as they moved deeper into the building, the crackling of the flames masking any other sounds. "Over here," Caitlin called, pointing toward a doorway where the voice seemed to emanate. The two enforcers kicked open the door, revealing a small, dimly lit room. Hanging from the ceiling was a small, box-like speaker. The child's cries echoed from it, hauntingly real. "What the—" one of the enforcers began, but his words died as the voice distorted, twisting into a manic, taunting tone. "Ah, did you come to save the day?" Jinx's voice purred through the speaker. "You enforcers are so predictable. It's almost boring." Caitlin's stomach dropped as her eyes darted around the room. Her breath caught as she spotted a drawing on the far wall, a crude, mocking sketch of a monkey. It was nearly identical to the one she had seen on the destroyed airship. Her heart raced as realization struck. "It's a trap," she shouted. "Get out, now!" But her warning came too late. A series of explosions erupted, the force of the detonation tearing through the building. The shock wave threw Caitlin off her feet, the deafening sound replaced by a high-pitched ringing in her ears. Dust and debris filled the air, and the world spun around her. Through the chaos, she caught glimpses of her fellow enforcers. 6 of them lay still, their bodies crushed beneath the collapsed structure. Others groaned in pain, blood staining their uniforms. Caitlin herself was pinned beneath a fallen beam, her body aching from the impact. She struggled to move, her vision blurry as the dust began to settle. Through the haze of smoke, Caitlin saw 2 figures moving through the wreckage. One of them, unmistakably, had vibrant blue hair and a manic grin was as vivid as her destructive handiwork. She strolled confidently through the rubble, her pistol holstered at her side. The other figure was harder to make out. A boy with glowing blue eyes walked beside her, his blonde hair catching the faint light of the flames. His calm, almost casual demeanor contrasted with the chaos around them. Caitlin's heart pounded as she strained to see more clearly. "It can't be," she thought, her mind racing. She had seen this boy before, or at least someone like him. The memory of the young Naruto flashed in her mind, the one presumed dead. But this couldn't be him, could it? "Who?" Caitlin whispered, her voice barely audible over the ringing in her ears. Jinx stopped for a moment, glancing in Caitlin's direction. Her grin widened, and she gave a playful wave before turning back to the boy. They spoke briefly, their words inaudible through the ringing in Caitlin's head, and then disappeared into the smoke together. Caitlin's vision blurred, and her body felt heavier with every passing second. The crude drawing of the monkey burned in her memory, alongside the image of Jinx and the mysterious boy. She clung to consciousness, but her injuries and the smoke proved too much. Her last thought before darkness claimed her was a desperate question. Was it really him? The world faded, leaving only silence. The streets of Piltover were eerily quiet as Jinx and Naruto made their way through the alleys, the faint glow of smog-laden lights casting long shadows. The aftermath of the explosion was still fresh, and Naruto walked slightly ahead of Jinx, his steps heavy with unspoken thoughts. "That was dangerous, Jinx," Naruto said, his tone steady but laced with concern. "It wasn't worth the risk. Now everyone's going to be looking for you." Jinx trailed behind, her pistol bouncing lightly at her hip. Her manic grin didn't waver as she twirled a fortified hex crystal between her fingers. "Oh, come on, Naruto," she teased. "You worry too much." It went off without a hitch. "Well, mostly." Naruto stopped in his tracks, turning to face her as she held up the crystal like a prize. His glowing blue eyes narrowed. "What's that?" Jinx's grin widened, her blue eyes sparkling with pride. A little souvenir. Found it during the fun. She tossed it lightly toward Naruto. Catch. Naruto instinctively caught the crystal, but the moment it touched his hand, he froze. The crystal seemed to hum faintly, its glow pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. He stared at it, feeling a strange, almost magnetic pull like it was trying to connect with him. The sensation was unsettlingly familiar. The world around Naruto blurred, and an image flashed in his mind, a blinding blue light and a woman with vivid red hair leaning over him. Her expression was warm, her eyes shimmering with joy as she cradled something small and fragile. "Welcome to the world, Naruto," she said softly, her voice like a melody. The vision shattered as pain lanced through his head, forcing Naruto to his knees. His hand shot to his temple, the crystal slipping from his grasp and landing on the ground with a faint clink. "Naruto!" Jinx's voice was sharp, her playful demeanor vanishing in an instant. She dropped to his side, her hands fluttering around him in panic. "What's wrong? Did I? I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "No," Naruto interrupted, his voice strained but firm. "It's not you." He shook his head, trying to clear the haze of pain and confusion. "It's my head, it just hurts." Jinx hesitated, her wide eyes filled with worry. "Are you sure? I didn't mean to make you upset, or..." Naruto managed a weak smile, reaching out to place a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I'm fine, really. It's just a headache." Naruto stood shakily, his gaze drifting around their surroundings. Something felt different. As his vision cleared, he noticed a small park ahead, dimly lit and largely abandoned. At its center stood a tall statue flanked by a smaller pedestal, both worn by time but lovingly maintained. Curious, Naruto walked toward the monument, his steps slow and deliberate. Jinx followed closely, still fidgeting nervously. The closer they got, the more Naruto's chest tightened, a sense of déjà vu washing over him like a cold wave. The statue depicted two figures, a man and a woman, their expression serene and full of warmth. Beneath them, an inscription carved into the stone read, "Here lay the beloved Minato and Kushina Uzumaki, devoted to Piltover's future." Beside the statue, a smaller pedestal bore a wreath of flowers. Another inscription was etched into the stone, in memory of Naruto Uzumaki, the golden boy of Piltover. Jinx squinted at the writing, leaning closer as she read it aloud. "Naruto Uzumaki? That's crazy. The kid has the same first name as you." Naruto stared at the pedestal, his breath catching in his throat. His hand reached out almost involuntarily, his fingertips brushing against the cold stone. His heart pounded, his mind racing with fragments of memories he couldn't quite piece together. Jinx tilted her head, watching him closely. "You okay, Naruto?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. Naruto blinked, tearing his gaze away from the pedestal to look at her. "Yeah," he said quietly, though his voice lacked conviction. "It's just weird. That's all." Jinx shrugged, clearly unsettled by his reaction, but unsure how to address it. "Guess it's a common name." "Huh," she said, trying to lighten the mood. "But hey, that's a fancy statue. They must have been important or something." Naruto nodded absently, his thoughts elsewhere. His eyes drifted back to the statue, to the warm expressions of the two figures. A strange, hollow ache settled in his chest, though he couldn't explain why. Jinx tugged on his sleeve gently. "Come on, let's get out of here before someone spots us." Naruto hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, let's go." As they walked away, Jinx chattered on, her usual energy returning as she recounted the details of their earlier escapade. Naruto listened half-heartedly, his mind lingering on the monument and the strange connection he couldn't shake. The name, the faces, the memory, it all felt too familiar. But for now, the truth remained just out of reach, leaving Naruto with more questions than answers. The grand chamber of Piltover's council was bathed in light from the towering stained glass windows, the morning sun casting vibrant colors across the marble floors. The council convened in an emergency session, their faces marked with concern following the previous night's tragic explosion. Counselors whispered among themselves as Jace Talus and Victor stepped forward to address the assembly. Jace stood tall, though his face betrayed the weight of the situation. Beside him, Victor leaned heavily on his cane, his sharp gaze scanning the room. The murmurs quieted as Counselor Mel gestured for them to speak. "Thank you, counselors." Jace began, his voice steady but grave. Last night's explosion was not just an act of terror, it was a targeted assault. The perpetrators not only took innocent lives, but also stole one of our fortified hex crystals and critical research papers. Gasps rippled through the chamber, and Counselor Hoskell leaned forward, his expression alarmed. "A fortified hex crystal? Are you certain?" Jace nodded. "Yes. Victor and I conducted a full inventory this morning. One crystal is missing." Counselor Shola frowned, her voice sharp. "And what's to stop them from turning it into a weapon against us?" "That's exactly what concerns us," Jace replied. He glanced at Victor, who nodded for him to continue. "With the stolen crystal and our research, it's possible for the Undercity to create something devastating. We cannot underestimate their ingenuity or their desperation." Counselor Ballbach's deep voice rumbled across the room. "What do you recommend, Talus?" Jace took a deep breath, his shoulders squared. "I propose that we suspend all Hextech operations, including the Hex Gates, until we recover the stolen crystal and ensure that this threat is neutralized." The room erupted into murmurs and protests. Counselor Hoskell rose to his feet. "Suspend the Hex Gates? Are you mad? Our trade routes rely on them. Shutting them down will cripple foreign commerce and cost Piltover millions." Counselor Shola nodded in agreement. "Not to mention the diplomatic fallout. The Hex Gates are the backbone of our relationships with other nations." Jace raised his hands, trying to calm the room. "I understand the consequences, but the risks are too great. If a weaponized Hex Crystal is unleashed, it could cause destruction far beyond last night's explosion. We must act swiftly and decisively." Counselor Medarda stood, her presence commanding immediate attention. "Jace is right to be cautious, but halting all Hextech operations is a drastic measure. Perhaps there's another way." Jace turned to her, his brow furrowing. "What do you suggest?" Mel stepped forward, her tone measured but firm. "The Council has the resources and authority to investigate this matter. But to lead this effort effectively, you'll need more than just our ear, Jace. You'll need a seat at this table." The room fell silent as Mel's words sank in. Even Jace seemed momentarily taken aback. Counselor Heimerdinger adjusted his spectacles, his bushy brows furrowing in thought. "I second Counselor Medarda's proposal. Jace's knowledge and experience with Hextech make him uniquely qualified to assist in this investigation. A seat on the council would grant him the authority and resources to act." Counselor Hoskell's face twisted in disapproval. "Giving a seat to a mere inventor? That's unprecedented." "It's also necessary," Mel countered smoothly. "Jace has proven himself time and again. The Hex Gates alone are reason enough to consider his elevation. And now, with this threat looming, he is our best chance at protecting Piltover." Counselor Shola leaned back in her chair, her expression contemplative. "A seat on the council is no small matter. Are we certain he's ready for this level of responsibility?" Jay stepped forward, his voice firm. "I didn't ask for this, but if it means protecting Piltover, I'll do whatever it takes. You have my word." Mel turned to the assembly. "Then let's put it to a vote." The motion passed with a 5-2 majority. Mel turned to Jace, a faint smile on her lips. "Congratulations, Counselor Talus." Jace inclined his head, though the weight of his new role was evident in his eyes. As the council session adjourned, Victor approached him quietly. "This is just the beginning," Victor said, his voice low but steady. "You've earned their trust. Now we must ensure that Hextech doesn't become a weapon of destruction." Jace nodded, his resolve hardening. "We will, Victor. Together." Back in Jinx's lair, she was hunched over her workbench, feverishly assembling pieces of metal, wires, and explosives into bizarre contraptions. Naruto sat on the edge of a beam nearby, staring blankly into the distance. His hands rested on his knees, his blue eyes glowing faintly as his mind churned with memories and fragments he couldn't piece together. He barely registered Jinx's constant muttering as she worked. "Almost got it," she whispered, her hands deftly twisting wires together. "Just a little more, and boom, Perfect. The door slammed open with a loud clang, and Silco's shadow loomed large as he entered. His footsteps were deliberate, his rage palpable. Jinx! Silco's voice thundered through the lair, making Jinx jolt upright. Do you have any idea what you've done? Jinx turned to face him, her eyes wide but defiant. You destroyed a building. Silco continued, his voice rising with every word. You killed enforcers. Do you have any idea how much heat you've brought down on us? Jinx muttered, cutting him off, barely listening. She gave a dismissive shrug and turned back to her workbench. Yeah. Silco's eye twitched at her flippant response. This is serious, Jinx, he roared. Your recklessness is jeopardizing everything we've built. Jinx didn't turn, waving her hand dismissively as she continued tinkering. Okay, got it. My bad. Silco clenched his fists, his voice lowering to a dangerous growl. Do you think this is a game? Do you think you can blow up buildings and slaughter enforcers without consequences? Naruto's glowing eyes flickered as he glanced toward them, his expression unreadable. Silco turned his attention to him next, his frustration boiling over. And you? Silco snapped, pointing at Naruto. You were there. You're supposed to keep her under control. Naruto remained silent, his glowing eyes distant. Silco stepped closer, his sharp gaze boring into the boy. Are you even listening? Naruto blinked, finally looking at him, but said nothing. His silence only seemed to enrage Silco further. Before Silco could press the issue, Jinx spun around, something glowing blue in her hand. Wait, Jinx said, cutting Silco off with an exaggerated grin. She held up the fortified hex crystal she had stolen, the light from it catching in her wild eyes. Look what I got. Silco's anger faltered as his eyes locked onto the glowing crystal. Jinx pressed a button on a nearby control panel, and the room erupted into a display of fireworks and neon lights. Bursts of color illuminated the lair, casting Silco's stern face in hues of pink, blue, and gold. See? Worth it, Jinx said, her tone casual but tinged with triumph. Told ya. She darted forward and threw her arms around Silco in a tight hug, her head pressing against his chest. You're not mad, right? You're not mad. Silco stiffened for a moment before resting a hand on her head, his expression softening. Always with the dramatics, he murmured, his tone losing some of its edge. But this is impressive. Jinx beamed up at him, practically glowing with pride. She stepped back, bouncing slightly on her heels as Silco examined the crystal more closely. His fingers traced the smooth surface, his mind already racing with possibilities. As Silco's gaze shifted toward Naruto, who had returned to staring at the wall, his expression distant. The boy's usual sharpness seemed dulled, his focus fractured. Silco's eyes narrowed, concern flickering behind his calculating demeanor. Something on your mind, Naruto? Silco asked, his voice low and probing. Naruto didn't respond immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost detached. It's nothing. Silco wasn't convinced. He turned the crystal over in his hands, his brow furrowing as he watched Naruto out of the corner of his eye. The boy had been reliable, unwavering in his loyalty to Jinx. But lately, something had shifted a change that Silco couldn't ignore. Be sure it stays nothing, Silco said finally, his tone carrying an unspoken warning. We can't afford distractions. Naruto glanced at him, his glowing eyes meeting Silco's piercing gaze for a moment before he nodded silently. As Silco turned and left the lair, Jinx turned to Naruto, her grin returning as if the tension had already evaporated. See? Told you he'd come around. Naruto offered a faint smile, but his thoughts lingered on the flashes of memory from earlier. The crystal's energy had stirred something deep within him, something he couldn't ignore. Jinx noticed his subdued demeanor and tilted her head. What's up with you, huh? You've been all spacey lately. Naruto hesitated, then shook his head. Nothing. Just tired. Jinx shrugged, seemingly satisfied with the answer. Well, you better snap out of it. We've got work to do, as she returned to her workbench, humming a jagged tune under her breath. Naruto watched her with a mixture of affection and unease. Silco's words echoed in his mind, and for the first time, Naruto began to wonder if his past whatever it held, might be catching up to him, and what that might mean for the fragile world he and Jinx had built. Caitlyn's room was a chaotic reflection of her mind. Maps of Piltover and Zaun covered one wall, marked with pins, string, and hastily scribbled notes. Photographs of destroyed airships, graffiti, and scorch marks surrounded the central image, the grinning monkey sketch she had seen at the crime scenes. A nearby desk was piled high with reports, clippings, and diagrams, illuminated by the dim glow of a desk lamp. Despite her recovery, Caitlyn had thrown herself into her investigation, determined to uncover the truth. She stood in front of the wall, her arms crossed as she stared at the web of connections she had pieced together. Her thoughts kept circling back to the boy with glowing blue eyes. His image lingered in her mind, tied to memories she hadn't touched in years. A name whispered itself in her heart, though she couldn't say it aloud. Naruto. It couldn't be, she murmured, pacing in front of the map. He's gone, isn't he? A part of her hoped she was wrong, that the boy she saw wasn't him. But a darker fear gnawed at her. What if it was Naruto? What if he had survived, only to become the monster she had seen that night, walking away with Jinx as destruction raged around them? A knock on the door broke her reverie. Caitlyn sighed, running a hand through her hair. Come in. The door creaked open to reveal Jace Talus, holding a modest bouquet of flowers. His expression softened as he stepped inside, glancing around at the chaos of her room. I thought you might like these, he said, holding out the bouquet with a sheepish smile. Caitlyn glanced at the flowers, her lips pressing into a thin line. Without a word, she took them and tossed them onto the overflowing pile of similar bouquets on her dresser. Jace's smile faltered. Thanks, she said curtly, turning back to her map. Jace stepped closer, his eyes scanning the sprawling display. Still working on this? Of course, Caitlyn replied, pointing to a section of the map. The smuggling operation, the explosion, the attack on the airship, it's all connected. I'm sure of it. Jace frowned. Connected to what? Caitlyn tapped a photograph of the grinning monkey sketch. Whoever's behind this. They're not just a criminal, they're pulling the strings of everything happening in the Undercity. And I'm going to find them. Jace hesitated. Kate, I get it. But you're going to need more than theories to convince the council. I don't care about the council, Caitlyn snapped. This is bigger than politics, Jace. He stepped back, raising his hands defensively. I'm not here to argue. Look, I've been made a counselor. I'm forming a new security team, and I want you on it. With your skills. Stop, Caitlyn interrupted, shaking her head. This isn't about my skills. My parents pulled strings to get me discharged from the enforcers, didn't they? Jace looked away, guilt flashing across his face. Caitlyn laughed bitterly. Of course they did. And now you're here to offer me a consolation prize? I don't need your charity, Jace. It's not charity, Jace insisted. It's a chance to make a difference. Leave, Caitlyn said firmly, turning back to her map. I don't need you or the council to do my job. Jace hesitated, his mouth opening as if to argue, but he thought better of it. With a quiet sigh, he turned and left, leaving Caitlyn alone with her thoughts. Determined to continue her investigation, Caitlyn gathered her coat and rifle, her mind set on her next lead. The henchman she had found aboard the airship, inmate 2135, was her only living connection to the perpetrators. If anyone could give her answers, it was him. The ferry ride to Stillwater Prison was cold and somber. Caitlyn stared out at the gray horizon, her thoughts returning to the boy she had seen with the blue-haired girl. A quiet part of her heart whispered a name again. Naruto. Could it really be him? Could the boy she had once adored, the boy she had called her little brother, have become the monster she feared? No, she muttered to herself, shaking her head. It can't be him. But doubt lingered, a shadow she couldn't shake. Inside Stillwater Prison, the warden greeted Caitlyn with a wary expression. You're here for inmate 2135? He's been incapacitated. What do you mean? Caitlyn asked sharply. The warden gestured for her to follow. He got into an altercation with another prisoner. He's alive, but unable to speak due to his injuries. Caitlyn's frustration bubbled beneath the surface. And the prisoner who attacked him? The warden stopped in front of an elevator, pressing the button to summon it. You'll find her on the 40th basement level. The elevator ride was long and cold, the silence oppressive. When the doors opened, Caitlin followed the warden to a solitary cell at the end of a dimly lit hallway. Inside sat a woman with pink hair, her arms resting casually on her knees. Her sharp eyes locked onto Caitlin the moment she stepped into view. Caitlin froze, her breath catching. The resemblance was unmistakable. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steady but curious. The woman smirked, tilting her head. "Depends. Who's asking?" "Caitlin Kierman," Caitlin replied, her tone clipped. "I'm investigating a series of crimes linked to the Undercity. The man you attacked was my lead." Vi leaned forward slightly, her smirk widening. "Then I guess you're out of luck." Caitlin's eyes narrowed. "You know something? I can see it in your eyes." Vi chuckled, leaning back against the wall. "You've got the look of a topsider who thinks she can fix everything with her shiny badge and fancy upbringing. Guess what? You don't belong here." Caitlin didn't flinch. "Maybe not. But if you want out of this cell, you'll start talking." Vi arched an eyebrow, her interest piqued. "And why would I help you?" "Because," Caitlin said firmly, "you're not the only one looking for answers. And whether you like it or not, we're on the same side." For the first time, Vi's smirk faltered. She studied Caitlin closely, her defiance softening into curiosity. "All right, Kierman," Vi said finally, leaning forward. "Let's talk." The solitary cell was cold and dim, the heavy bars casting long shadows on the floor. Caitlin stood stiffly just outside the cell, her sharp eyes fixed on Vi, who lounged lazily against the back wall with an air of nonchalance. The tension between them was palpable, Caitlin's determination clashing with Vi's defiance. "Let's start simple," Caitlin said, her voice calm but firm. "What's your name?" "What?" Vi asked, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "You gonna send me a birthday card?" Caitlin's lips tightened. "You attacked inmate 2135. "Why?" Vi shrugged, a smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Guy had a face I didn't like." Frustration bubbled beneath Caitlin's composed exterior, but she pressed on. "What do you know about the explosion near the docks?" Vi tilted her head, pretending to think. Lots of smoke, loud boom, people screaming. Real mess. You should look into it." Caitlin's patience was wearing thin. "This isn't a joke." "Could have fooled me," Vi shot back, crossing her arms. "You topsiders are always so serious." Caitlin sighed, taking a step back. "Fine. If you're not going to cooperate, I'll leave you to rot." As she turned to go, Vi called after her with a mocking grin. "Be sure to give Silco a kiss for me." Caitlin froze mid-step, her brow furrowing. Slowly, she turned back, her gaze sharp. "What do you know about Silco?" Vi's smirk widened. "Oh, now you're curious. Answer the question," Caitlin demanded, her tone hardening. Vi leaned forward slightly, her eyes gleaming with amusement. "What's the matter, princess? Didn't your fancy files tell you everything about Silco?" "I want the truth," Caitlin snapped. "Who is he?" Vi let out a short laugh, shaking her head. "You don't know, do you? Figures. You topsiders have no clue what's really going on down here." Caitlin hesitated, then stepped closer to the cell. A red line, painted on the ground, marked the boundary she wasn't supposed to cross, but her curiosity got the better of her. Carefully, she stepped over the line, moving close enough that Vi could reach her through the bars. Caitlin pulled a photograph from her coat pocket and held it up. It showed one of Jinx's monkey drawings, a crude but haunting image that had been found at multiple crime scenes. "What do you know about this?" The smirk fell from Vi's face as her eyes locked onto the photo. For the first time, she seemed genuinely interested. She leaned forward, her expression hardening. "Where did you get that?" "You tell me," Caitlin countered, holding her ground. "Does inmate 2135 work for Silco?" Vi snorted, shaking her head. "Of course he does. They all do." Caitlin's heart quickened. "Prove it." Vi leaned back against the wall, her smirk returning. "I could, but not from inside this cage." The implication hung heavily in the air. Caitlin's jaw tightened, her thoughts racing. She couldn't ignore the connection Vi seemed to have with the Undercity's criminal network, but trusting her felt like a gamble. "I can't just take your word for it," Caitlin said, her tone guarded. Vi rolled her eyes. "Of course you can't. You topsiders don't trust anyone. But if you actually want to stop Silco, you're going to need me." Caitlin hesitated, torn between her instincts and the growing weight of her investigation. "Why should I believe you?" "You don't have to believe me," Vi replied evenly. But ask yourself this. Do you really think you're going to solve this without getting your hands dirty? Caitlin said nothing, her mind churning. After a moment, she turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing in the dim corridor. Vi watched her go, a flicker of disappointment crossing her face before she shook it off. Back in her room later that night, Caitlin sat at her desk, staring at the photograph of the monkey drawing. Her mind returned to the boy with glowing blue eyes, the enigma that haunted her thoughts. If Vi was connected to this chaos, perhaps she could lead Caitlin to the answers she desperately sought. But releasing her? It was a risk, and Caitlin knew it. The next morning, Caitlin returned to Stillwater Prison. Orders signed by Jace were in her hand, granting her the authority to release Vi into her custody. As she handed the paperwork to the warden, she couldn't help but wonder if she was making the right choice. When Vi was let out of her cell, she looked Caitlin over with a raised eyebrow. "Didn't think you'd actually come back. Don't make me regret it," Caitlin said curtly, handing her a set of restraints. Vi smirked as she slipped on the restraints. "Relax, Cupcake. You're gonna love working with me." Caitlin's glare didn't waver, but deep down, she couldn't help but feel like the real game was only just beginning. Silco's office was thick with tension. The lavishly renovated room, once a storage area in the Undercity's labyrinth of tunnels, now served as the nerve center of Silco's operations. A massive desk dominated the room, papers and maps spread haphazardly across its surface. Behind it, Silco sat in his high-backed chair, his sharp eyes fixed on Marcus, who paced furiously in front of him. The faint glow of neon lights filtered through the room's single window, casting a cold, eerie glow over the scene. The faint hum of machinery echoed in the distance, a constant reminder of the industrial chaos that defined Zaun. "You've gone too far this time, Silco," Marcus spat, slamming his fist on the desk. "6 of my enforcers, 6 are dead because of her. I can't keep covering for you." Silco remained calm, his posture unbothered. He leaned back in his chair, the faint flicker of amusement playing at the corners of his mouth. "They knew the risks, Sheriff. The Undercity isn't exactly a safe place for your kind." Marcus glared at him, his frustration boiling over. "This isn't a joke. Jinx is out of control. You can't rein her in anymore, and it's costing me us. I want her brought in. She's a liability." The mention of Jinx's name caused Silco's smile to vanish. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "Jinx is not a liability. She's my responsibility." Marcus laughed bitterly, throwing his hands up in exasperation. "Your responsibility has turned the entire city against us. I can't keep cleaning up her messes. If this keeps up, they'll come after both of us." Silco's expression darkened, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. "You think this is about Jinx?" "No, Marcus, this is about control. The Firelights have been a thorn in my side for too long, and their little stunt at the docks only proves they're getting bolder. Let the blame fall where it belongs." Marcus frowned, his jaw tightening. "You want me to pin this on the Firelights? No one will believe that." Silco leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. "They don't need to believe it. They just need to stop asking questions. You're a smart man, Marcus. You know how to spin a story." Marcus hesitated, the conflict clear on his face. "And what happens when they figure out the truth?" "They won't," Silco said firmly, "because by then, you'll have given them a bigger threat to focus on. The Firelights have been causing trouble for months. This is the perfect opportunity to frame them as a growing danger. A threat that only you can handle." Marcus paced again, running a hand through his hair. "You're asking me to sell a lie." Silco's gaze never wavered. "I'm asking you to protect your people. Isn't that why you're here, Sheriff? To maintain order." The words hit their mark, and Marcus stopped pacing. He stared at Silco, his face etched with anger and doubt. Slowly, he nodded, though his expression remained bitter. "Fine, I'll pin it on the Firelights. But this is the last time, Silco. The last time." Silco's smile returned, though it was colder than before. "Good. I knew I could count on you, Marcus." Marcus turned to leave, but Silco's voice stopped him at the door. "Oh, and Sheriff, be careful where your loyalty lies. It's a dangerous game you're playing." Marcus didn't respond, slamming the door shut behind him as he left. Silco sat back in his chair, exhaling slowly. He gazed at the maps and papers scattered across his desk, his thoughts already turning to his next move. The soft creak of a floorboard pulled his attention to the shadows near the edge of the room. "You handled that well," a voice drawled from the darkness. Silco's gaze shifted as Naruto stepped forward, his glowing blue eyes piercing the dim light. His movements were calm, almost lazy, but his presence carried a weight that demanded attention. Silco raised an eyebrow. "Eavesdropping, are we?" Naruto shrugged, the faintest of smirks tugging at his lips. "Call it staying informed." Silco leaned back in his chair, observing Naruto closely. "I assume you have thoughts." Naruto's smirk widened, his eyes flickering with an unspoken energy. "Framing the firelights? Smart move. They're getting bold. Too bold." He paused, his expression darkening. "And familiar." Silco tilted his head slightly, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "Familiar how?" Naruto crossed his arms, his fingers tapping against his biceps as if he were weighing his next words. "Their leader, he's different. The way he fights, the way he moves, it's like he knows me, like he's got a grudge." Silco frowned slightly, his sharp mind analyzing the implications. "A personal connection, then?" Naruto nodded slowly, his gaze distant. "Feels that way. He fights like he's got something to prove. Like taking me down is the only thing on his mind." Silco leaned against the edge of his desk, his eyes watching Naruto with a calculating gaze. "And you? How are you holding up?" he asked, his voice low and smooth, though there was a faint edge of genuine curiosity beneath his usual tone of authority. Naruto hesitated, his glowing blue eyes narrowing slightly. The question hung in the air, heavier than it should have been. Silco had always treated him as an asset, a weapon to wield. Yet, there were moments fleeting and subtle when Naruto caught glimpses of something more, as if Silco saw in him a reflection of his own struggles. For a brief moment, Naruto considered answering honestly. He thought about the statue of Minato and Kushina, the name Naruto Uzumaki etched in a stone beneath them, and the memories that tugged at the edges of his mind. He thought about the masked men who had tested him earlier and the gnawing questions about what the crystal embedded in his chest was really doing to him. Could I talk to him about it? Naruto wondered, his fist tightening. Silco was the closest thing he had to a father figure now, the only one who had given him purpose since the day Jinx found him broken and alone in Zaun. Maybe Silco would listen, offer some kind of guidance. But then he dismissed the thought. He wouldn't care. "My problems aren't his concern." Naruto straightened, his expression hardening. "I'm fine," he said tersely, his tone sharper than he intended. The flicker of tension in his voice betrayed the storm brewing beneath the surface, but he didn't let it show for long. Instead, he let his emotions fuel him, the familiar surge of energy flaring within him. He clenched his fists at his sides, and the crystal embedded in his chest pulsed with life, spreading a glow through his veins like liquid fire. The room shifted as Naruto's transformation began, his pale skin illuminated with an eerie blue hue, and electricity crackled around him in erratic arcs. His hair spiked upward, defying gravity as the raw power coursed through him. His glowing eyes burned brighter, radiating an intensity that made the air around him hum with energy. Silco didn't move, though his fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the desk. His expression was a careful mix of fascination and unease. "Impressive," he murmured, his voice quiet but steady. "Though I wonder, how much of that is you, and how much is the crystal?" Naruto's lips curled into a humorless smile, his eyes locking onto Silco's. "Doesn't matter," he said, his voice cold and tinged with bitterness. "It's part of me now. And right now, it's the only thing keeping me grounded." He unclenched his fists, the electricity flaring violently before stabilizing. The flickering arcs cast sharp shadows across the room, highlighting the faint tension in Silco's face. Naruto's voice dropped, sharp and resolute. "I'm ready to let off some steam. Maybe take out a few firelights if I'm lucky." Silco opened his mouth to speak, but before he could respond, Naruto vanished in a flash of blue light. The crackle of electricity echoed through the room, leaving the faint scent of ozone in the air and faint scorch marks on the floor where he had stood. Silco exhaled slowly, his mismatched eyes lingering on the scorch marks. He reached for his glass, setting it down with a quiet clink before returning to his desk. His fingers tapped against the wood as he mulled over what he had just witnessed. Powerful, he muttered under his breath, his mind already turning over the implications. But volatile, he leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers as his gaze became distant. Naruto was unlike anyone Silco had ever dealt with. The crystal embedded in the boy's chest gave him strength that bordered on otherworldly, but also made him unpredictable. Silco's mind turned over the question that had been gnawing at him for some time. Naruto was a force of nature, a weapon that could bring Piltover to its knees. But could he truly control him? And more importantly, what would happen if Naruto ever turned that power against him? For now, there was no clear answer. Jace sat in his office, the warm glow of hex light illuminating the papers spread across his desk. His usually sharp gaze was clouded with frustration as he scrolled through the Hexgate logs, his fingers tapping a steady rhythm against the table. What he had expected to be minor discrepancies, a clerical error here, a misplaced shipment, there was turning into something far more insidious. Impossible, he muttered under his breath, leaning closer to the glowing console. Transactions flagged as suspicious had no clear origin or destination. Worse, the timestamps didn't align with official trade routes. It wasn't just a few discrepancies. It was a systematic exploitation of the Hexgate network. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts, and Victor entered, his gait slightly uneven as he leaned on his cane. "Still at this?" Victor asked, his voice tinged with mild disapproval. "I thought you were focused on Progress Day speeches, council meetings, and politics." Jace sighed, rubbing his temples. "This isn't just politics, Victor. Someone's abusing the Hexgates are Hexgates. These transactions don't add up." Victor approached, peering over Jace's shoulder at the console. "And you believe this is worth your time? The people who need Hextech, who need progress, can't afford to wait while you chase shadows and ledgers." "It's not just shadows," Jace retorted, his tone sharper than he intended. He gestured to the screen. "This is organized. Whoever's behind it is funneling resources for something big. If we ignore it, it could destroy everything we've built." Victor sighed, straightening. "Perhaps. But what use is progress if you let the politics consume you?" "Science, Jace. That's where our focus should be." Before Jace could respond, the door swung open, and Marcus strode in, his expression tense. "You call?" Jace wasted no time, standing to greet him with a clipboard in hand. "Yes, this is urgent. I've been going through the Hexgate logs, and I found significant discrepancies. Suspicious transactions, missing cargo, it's all here." Marcus's jaw tightened as he glanced at the papers Jace handed him. "And you think this is corruption?" Jace's eyes narrowed. "What else could it be? Someone's using the Hexgates for their own gain, and it's happening under your nose." Marcus's lips pressed into a thin line. "The Firelights have been our chief suspect for months. They've been smuggling shimmer and targeting shipments." Jace shook his head, frustration evident in his posture. "This isn't just the Firelights. This is bigger. It's coordinated. I need you to take this seriously, Marcus. If we don't stop this now." Marcus raised a hand, cutting him off. "I'll look into it. But you need to understand, this isn't as simple as shutting down a trade route. The Undercity isn't going to roll over just because you've got a list of numbers." Jace clenched his fists, biting back his retort. "Fine, just do something." As Marcus left, Jace turned to Victor, his frustration still simmering. "Why does no one take this seriously?" Victor didn't respond. His face had grown pale, his brow slick with sweat. He wavered slightly, one hand gripping the edge of the desk as the other clutched his side. His cane slipped from his grasp, clattering to the floor. "Victor!" Jace stepped toward him, concern flooding his voice. "Are you all right?" Victor waved him off weakly, his breathing labored. "I'm fine, just overworked." "You're not fine," Jace insisted, moving to steady him. "You need to rest." Victor shook his head, his tone firm despite his weakened state. "No, there's too much to do. The people, they can't wait." Jace frowned, his grip tightening on Victor's arm. "You're pushing yourself too hard. If you don't take care of yourself, you won't be able to help anyone." Victor pulled away, steadying himself on the desk. I appreciate your concern, Jace, but I have work to do. Without waiting for a response, Victor retrieved his cane and limped toward the door. Jace watched him go, a knot of worry tightening in his chest. He couldn't shake the feeling that Victor was keeping something from him. As Victor disappeared down the hallway, Jace turned back to his desk, his resolve hardening. If no one else was going to take this corruption seriously, he would, even if it meant taking on the entire system himself. The streets of Zon blurred past as Naruto moved through the night, his body crackling with energy as he zapped from one shadowy corner to another. The unstable crystal embedded in his chest pulsed erratically, its energy coursing through his veins in jagged, uncontrolled surges. The pain had become a familiar presence, dull yet persistent, but tonight it felt sharper, as if the crystal was pushing against the limits of his body. His mind raced, a chaotic tangle of thoughts and emotions that he struggled to suppress. The earlier encounter with Silco lingered in his mind, Silco's words circling like vultures over his growing doubts. How much of this is me? How much is the crystal? Naruto clenched his fists, his glowing eyes narrowing as he forced the thoughts away. He didn't need answers, he needed action. A commotion broke the rhythm of his restless wandering. Shouts echoed through the alleys, followed by the sound of frantic footsteps and a child's panicked breathing. Naruto slowed, his glowing eyes scanning the scene ahead. A young girl darted through the narrow alley, clutching a small sack of food to her chest. Her short brown hair was matted with sweat, and her golden brown eyes darted wildly, searching for an escape. Behind her, a group of thugs pursued with malicious intent, their jeers and laughter cutting through the air. "Give it up, brat!" one of the men shouted. "You're not getting away." Naruto watched from the shadows, his hood drawn up as he leaned against the wall. His first instinct was to walk away. It wasn't his problem. Zon was filled with moments like this, and he'd learned long ago not to care. But as he watched the girl stumble and catch herself, her determination burning bright despite her fear, something stirred within him. For a fleeting moment, he saw another face superimposed over hers, a younger Jinx, back when she was still powder. The memory hit him like a lightning strike, the weight of his promise to protect Jinx pressing against his chest. Before he could think twice, Naruto zapped forward, appearing in a crackling flash of blue light directly in front of the girl. She skidded to a halt, her wide, terrified eyes locking onto him. Her grip on the sack tightened as she instinctively ducked behind him. The thugs froze mid-step as the faint glow of Naruto's eyes pierced through the shadows. Recognition spread like wildfire among them, and their confident jeers turned to murmurs of fear. The blue-eyed demon. One of them whispered, his voice trembling. Most of the group began to back away, their courage evaporating in the face of Zon's infamous demon. But one man, larger and meaner looking than the rest, stepped forward with a sneer. "You might scare them," he growled, his voice dripping with bravado. "But I'll get the kid when you're not around." Naruto's glowing eyes locked onto the man, and a surge of anger flared within him. The crystal pulsed violently in response, sending sparks of energy crackling through the air. He didn't say a word as he zapped forward, his movements too fast to track. Before the thug could react, Naruto slammed him against the nearest wall, his hand gripping the man's collar like a vice. The air around them hummed with power as Naruto's voice dropped to a low, dangerous growl. "You won't touch her," he said, his tone cold and final. The electricity crackling around his body surged, causing the thug to flinch. "Do you understand?" The man nodded frantically, his bravado shattered. "Why, yeah, I got it. I won't. I swear." Naruto released him with a shove, sending him stumbling to the ground. The rest of the thugs didn't wait for an invitation to leave, dragging their wounded friend with them as they fled into the shadows. The alley was silent now, save for the faint crackle of residual energy fading around Naruto. The girl stood before him, clutching the sack of stolen food, her golden brown eyes wide and fixed on him with a mix of fear and curiosity. Naruto's glowing blue eyes dimmed slightly as he crouched down, trying to look less intimidating. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low but steady. The girl nodded, a quick and hesitant motion. Naruto waited for her to say something, but no words came. Her lips pressed together tightly, her gaze darting between his eyes and the ground. Naruto frowned, the silence stretching out uncomfortably. "You don't talk?" he asked, tilting his head slightly. She shook her head this time, her movements deliberate. The realization settled over Naruto as he leaned back on his heels. Something about her silence, her small stature, and the defiant way she stood there reminded him too much of someone else. Powder. He felt a faint pain in his chest, a dull ache that flared like a spark threatening to ignite. It was as if the crystal embedded inside him responded to the memory, twisting something deep within. He pushed the pain aside, focusing on the girl in front of him. "You need to be more careful around here," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. "This isn't a safe place for kids like you." The girl nodded again, her gaze unwavering. Naruto stared at her for a moment, trying to understand her silence. Despite her quietness, there was something loud in her eyes, a resilience that he recognized all too well. His expression softened, the tension in his body easing slightly. "Yeah," he muttered, almost to himself. "I get it." As he straightened up, Naruto turned to leave. But before he could take a step, he felt a small hand grab his leg. He froze, looking down to see the girl clutching him tightly, her wide eyes staring up at him. For a moment, all he saw was a younger Powder, her small hands gripping his sleeve as she begged him not to leave her. The pain in his chest flared again, this time sharp and searing. Naruto gasped, dropping to one knee as he clutched at his chest. A guttural cough racked his body, and blood spattered onto the ground. His glowing eyes dimmed further, flickering like a dying light as his body trembled. The girl took a step back, her expression shifting to shock and fear. Naruto tried to steady himself, his breaths ragged. I'm okay," he managed, though his voice was weak. The girl didn't move, watching him with wide, fearful eyes. She clutched the sack of food tighter, as if it could shield her from whatever was happening to him. Naruto slowly forced himself back to his feet, swaying slightly as his body adjusted. He wiped the blood from his mouth, his trembling hand leaving a crimson streak across his pale skin. His glowing eyes returned, faint but steady, as he looked at the girl. "I'm really sorry," he said, his voice softer now. "But I have to go." The girl didn't nod this time. She simply watched him, her small face filled with worry. Naruto took a step back, pausing for a moment. He offered her a weak smile, his bloodied lips curling just slightly. "Be safe, okay?" he said, raising his hand at a peace sign. The girl blinked, then smiled a small, tentative smile that seemed to break through the lingering fear. Naruto's chest ached again, but this time it wasn't the crystal. It was something else, something he didn't fully understand. With a faint crackle of energy, Naruto zapped away, leaving the girl alone in the alley. The moment he stopped moving, his body felt like it was on fire. The crystal's energy surged erratically, fighting against him as he collapsed against a wall in a quiet corner of Zon. His glowing eyes dimmed entirely for a moment, leaving him in darkness. He clutched at his chest, his breath shallow and uneven. "What's happening to me?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. The pain subsided gradually, the crystal's energy stabilizing as if it, too, needed a moment to recover. Naruto leaned his head back against the wall, his mind swirling with questions he couldn't answer. He thought of the girl, the defiance in her golden brown eyes, her silence, and the way she'd smiled at him despite everything. For a fleeting moment, she had reminded him of something he couldn't place, something that felt painfully familiar. Pushing the thought aside, Naruto forced himself to his feet. His body felt heavier than before, the crystal's toll weighing on him more each day. But he couldn't stop now. Not yet. He turned toward Jinx's lair, the only place he could think to go. Whatever was happening to him, he had to push through it for her, if nothing else. But Naruto didn't zap away to Jinx's lair immediately. Instead, he found himself lingering on a nearby rooftop, crouched low as he watched the young girl from the shadows. She still clutched the sack of stolen food to her chest, her steps cautious and deliberate as she navigated the dark alleys of Zaun. His glowing eyes flickered faintly, dimmed from the strain of earlier. Naruto's body still ached, the crystal embedded in his chest pulsing like a second heartbeat. He pressed a hand against it, grimacing at the sharp pang that shot through him. But despite the pain, he couldn't bring himself to leave. The girl reminded him too much of someone, too much of Powder. There was a defiance in her quiet movements, a determination that belied her small frame. She moved as though she had already seen too much of the world, and yet still fought to survive. Why am I even doing this? Naruto asked himself, shaking his head. This isn't my problem. But deep down, he knew why. He couldn't just leave her. Not yet. From his perch, Naruto followed her silently, leaping from one rooftop to another as she made her way through the maze like streets of Zaun. The girl glanced over her shoulder a few times, her golden brown eyes darting nervously into the shadows, but she never saw him. She was careful, sticking close to the walls and avoiding the more dangerous-looking paths. Naruto's glowing eyes tracked her every move. His chest throbbed again, the pain a constant reminder of the instability inside him. But he ignored it, focusing instead on the girl's small figure below. When she finally reached what appeared to be her destination, a decrepit building with boarded-up windows, she hesitated at the entrance. She looked around one last time, her expression cautious, before slipping inside. Naruto stayed on the rooftop for a moment longer, his eyes fixed on the darkened doorway. He didn't move until he saw a faint flicker of light from one of the upper windows, signaling that she was safely inside. Satisfied, Naruto smiled as he straightened up, the tension in his body easing slightly. He zapped away in a flash of blue light, leaving the girl's small, hidden world behind. Jinx's lair hummed with the chaotic energy she thrived on. Machines sparked and whirred around the cluttered space, their rhythms as erratic as her thoughts. At her workbench, she tinkered with a hextech device, its faint glow reflecting in her wide, mismatched eyes. The notes she'd stolen from Piltover's finest minds, Jace and Victor, were spread across the table, scribbled with her own chaotic doodles. Just a little tweak here, she muttered, her voice almost sing-song. Imperfect, she grinned as she flipped the lever, anticipation crackling in her gaze. The machine roared to life, pulsing with raw, chaotic energy. A shockwave of light and sound exploded from the device, rattling the walls and scattering tools across the floor. But as the pulse intensified, Jinx froze. Her grin faded, replaced by wide-eyed terror as memories crashed over her like a tidal wave. The explosion that destroyed her family played out in her mind, vivid and unrelenting. The screams, the fire, the blinding light. It all came rushing back. No, 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 she whispered, backing away from the machine. Her chest heaved as panic overtook her, tears welling up and spilling over. She let out a choked sob and fled to the corner of the room, curling into herself as the device continued to hum. A flash of blue light illuminated the room as Naruto zapped in, his hood still drawn over his face. He took in the disarray, the lingering light from the hextech device making his stomach churn. But it wasn't the chaos that held his attention, it was Jinx. She was crumpled on the floor, clutching her knees to her chest, her sobs loud and unrestrained. Her entire body trembled, and she looked so small, so fragile in that moment. Jinx, Naruto said softly, his voice breaking as he crossed the room in a single step. He knelt beside her, hesitating for a fraction of a second before pulling her into his arms. Her fingers gripped his shirt desperately, as if he were the only thing keeping her tethered to reality. Her sobs grew louder, each one cutting Naruto to the core. "I'm here," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I've got you. It's okay." Jinx's tears soaked into his chest as she clung to him, shaking violently. Naruto's arms tightened around her, his hand brushing over her hair in a soothing motion. Her pain was palpable, raw, and overwhelming, and it mirrored something deep inside of him, something he kept buried beneath his quiet strength. Naruto's glowing blue eyes flickered toward the device still humming on the workbench. The light it emitted sent a shiver down his spine, stirring memories he'd tried so hard to suppress. It was the same light, the blinding, suffocating brilliance that had taken everything from him. Twice, his jaw tightened as his veins lit up with faint blue streaks, the crystal embedded in his chest reacting to his emotions. A sharp pain stabbed through him, but he ignored it. For Jinx's sake, he had to. Stretching out one arm, Naruto sent a pulse of energy toward the machine. The crystal within dimmed, and the device powered down with a final sputter, plunging the room into a heavy silence. He exhaled slowly, slumping back to the floor. Jinx's sobs had quieted, but her body still trembled as she leaned against him. Jinx pulled back slightly, her tear-streaked face looking up at him with an expression that was both vulnerable and searching. I didn't mean to, she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Naruto shook his head, his glowing eyes softening. It's not your fault, he said firmly, reaching out to wipe a tear from her cheek with his thumb. His touch was gentle, almost reverent. You're too beautiful to cry like this. Jinx blinked, startled by his words. Her cheeks flushed faintly, and for a moment, she looked like the girl she used to be like powder. Her lips parted as if to speak, but the words didn't come. Naruto's heart pounded as his gaze flickered to her lips. The air between them felt charged, heavy with unspoken emotions. But neither of them moved. Slowly, almost instinctively, they turned away from each other, the fragile moment left unbroken. Jinx let out a shaky breath, her head resting against Naruto's shoulder. I didn't mean for it to feel like that, she admitted quietly. The light, the sound, it's just like back then. Naruto nodded, his hand resting lightly on her back. I know, he said softly. It felt the same for me. They sat in silence for a moment, their shared pain connecting them in a way neither of them could fully articulate. But Naruto's mind was a storm beneath his calm exterior. The light, the sound, the pain, it was all too familiar. And the crystal in his chest was beginning to feel more like a curse than a blessing. Why do you stay? Jinx asked suddenly, her voice trembling. Why don't you leave, like everyone else? Naruto turned to her, his glowing eyes filled with quiet determination. Because I don't have anything else, he said simply. His voice was steady, but inside, he felt the weight of his own words. You're the only one I have left, Jinx, and I'm not losing you. Her breath hitched, her eyes shimmering with something other than pain for the first time in a long while. For a brief moment, she felt safe. I don't want to lose you either, she whispered. Naruto smiled faintly, brushing a stray strand of blue hair from her face. Then we won't, he said. Whatever happens, we stick together. Always. Jinx nodded, a small, hesitant smile breaking through the remnants of her tears. She leaned into him, letting his warmth and presence soothe the lingering ache in her chest. But as she drifted toward calm, Naruto's mind remained restless. He hit it, well, he always did. But the truth was, he wasn't fine, not even close. The train station was dark with only a tiny bit of light, the mechanical hum of machinery filling the air as steam hissed from nearby pipes. Caitlin adjusted her rifle strap, eyeing the rusted train car in front of them. It wasn't exactly the safest way into Zaun, but it would get them there quickly. This'll take us straight into the Undercity, Caitlin said, gesturing toward the train. Vi crossed her arms, raising an eyebrow. You think that thing's safe? One bump, and we're sitting ducks. Caitlin frowned. It's better than walking. Vi smirked and began stretching her arms. Nah, I got a better way. Before Caitlin could argue, Vi was off, scaling the side of the train station and leaping effortlessly onto the nearby rooftops. She moved like a shadow, her movements precise and confident as she bounded toward the city below. Of course, Caitlin muttered under her breath, reluctantly following. Her first attempt to climb the wall was slow and awkward, and she barely made it onto the first roof before Vi disappeared ahead of her. The uneven surfaces and gaps between buildings proved challenging, but Caitlin gritted her teeth and pushed forward, determined not to be left behind. By the time she reached the ground, panting and clutching her knees, Vi was leaning casually against a wall, a smirk playing on her lips. "Not bad, Cupcake," Vi teased. "For a topsider." Caitlin glared at her but didn't respond, her pride stinging more than her hands. As the pair continued deeper into the Undercity, two burly street thugs stepped out from an alleyway, blocking their path. Their clothes were tattered, their faces scarred, and their eyes gleamed with malice. "Well," one of them said, cracking his knuckles, "look who decided to take a stroll through our turf." "Cute," Vi replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Now move," the second thug sneered. "Not so fast. You're not getting past without." He didn't get to finish his sentence. Vi moved like lightning, landing a punch square on his jaw and sending him sprawling. The other thug lunged at her, but she ducked under his swing, driving her knee into his stomach and following up with a quick uppercut that left him groaning on the ground. As Vi dusted off her hands, Caitlin finally caught up, looking slightly horrified. "Was that really necessary?" "Yep," Vi said, stripping the jacket off one of the unconscious thugs. She tossed it over her shoulder before grabbing the other thug's shirt and throwing it toward Caitlin. "Put this on. You're a walking target in that enforcer uniform." Caitlin hesitated, holding up the dirty shirt with a grimace. "You can't be serious." Vi grinned. "What's the matter? Too much dirt for your fancy, topside-ear sensibilities." Before Caitlin could retort, the groaning thug muttered, "You won't get away with this, not with the blue-eyed demon around." Vi froze for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Blue-eyed demon?" she asked, her tone casual. "Never heard of him." The thug chuckled weakly, his voice laced with fear. "You will. Anyone who crosses him, they don't forget the pain." Caitlin adjusted the oversized shirt as she walked closer. "The blue-eyed demon is like a myth," she said. "They say anyone who sees him doesn't remember his face. Only flashes of blue and a lot of pain. Wie frugid, nonchalant. Sound like a bedtime story to me." "Let's go." The pair wound their way through the labyrinth of Zon streets, the air heavy with the smell of oil, smoke, and decay. Eventually, they stopped at a small food stall tucked between two towering pipes. The stall was run by an older man with a kind face and a pair of mechanical goggles perched on his forehead. "Jericho," Vi said, leaning on the counter with a grin. "Still serving up the best in Zon?" Jericho chuckled, grabbing a bowl and filling it with steaming fish covered in a spicy sauce. "Still running your mouth, I see. You want the usual." "You know it," Vi replied, snatching the bowl and digging in voraciously. Caitlin stood awkwardly beside her, her gaze darting between Vi and the stall owner. "I thought we were here for information." Vi paused mid-bite, raising an eyebrow. "I was hungry." Caitlin sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Seriously?" Jericho chuckled again, sliding a napkin toward Vi. She grabbed it without much thought, wiping her mouth as she finished the bowl. Only when Caitlin gave her a pointed look did Vi glance at the napkin and notice the crude sigil drawn on it. Her expression changed immediately, her playful demeanor replaced by sharp focus. She folded the napkin carefully and slid it into her pocket. "Thanks, Jericho," she said, tossing a few coins onto the counter. As they walked away, Caitlin couldn't help but press. "What was that?" Vi grinned, her confidence returning. "A lead." Caitlin frowned. "And you didn't think to mention that earlier?" "Gotta keep you on your toes. Cupcake," Vi said with a wink, her pace quickening. "Now let's move. We got a lot of ground to cover." Caitlin sighed, realizing that keeping up with Vi was going to be more challenging than she'd anticipated. But she wasn't about to give up, not when the answers she sought felt so close. The lab was filled with the soft hum of machinery and the faint glow of hex light as Victor hunched over his workbench, his sharp eyes fixed on a levitating device covered in glowing, shifting runes. He adjusted a tool with meticulous precision, his focus unwavering despite the chaos of notes and schematics scattered around him. The device before him pulsed with a faint blue light, its surface etched with intricate runic patterns that seemed to shift and rearrange themselves as if alive. Victor's hands moved deftly, swapping out small components and carving new runes into the device. Jace entered the lab, rubbing the back of his neck. "Victor, it's late. You should get some rest." Victor didn't look up. "So should you." But here we are. Jace approached, his gaze drawn to the glowing device. What is that? Victor straightened, taking a step back to admire his work. A prototype. I've been theorizing that Hextech doesn't need to be bound to a single function. What if it could learn? Adapt to the needs of its user. Jace frowned, leaning closer. You're saying it could think for itself? In a way, yes, Victor replied, his voice filled with quiet excitement. This, he gestured to the levitating device, is the first step toward a truly adaptive technology. The Hex Core. Jace's brow furrowed as he studied the pulsing object. And you're sure this is safe? Victor finally looked at him, a faint smirk playing on his lips. Of course not. But when has that ever stopped us? Jace sighed, shaking his head. You're impossible. Victor turned back to the Hex Core, his expression growing serious. If this works, Jace, it could revolutionize everything. It could heal, build, solve problems we haven't even dreamed of yet. Isn't that worth the risk? Jace nodded reluctantly. Just don't push yourself too hard. Victor didn't respond, his attention already back on the Hex Core as it shifted and pulsed, a faint echo of something far greater yet to come. Later that evening, Jace found himself seated in a plush mezzanine box at one of Piltover's grand theaters. The stage below was bathed in soft light, and a musician sat at its center, playing a hybrid instrument that combined strings and keys with Hextech enhancements. The sound it produced was hauntingly beautiful, filling the air with a melody that seemed to vibrate in the very soul of the audience. Mel sat beside him, her sharp eyes scanning the crowd below as if searching for something or someone. This is impressive, Jace said quietly, gesturing to the musician. I didn't think Hextech could be used like this. Mel's lips curved into a faint smile. Hextech is more than tools and weapons, Jace. It's art, progress, a symbol of Piltover's future. That's why it's so dangerous. Jace raised an eyebrow. Dangerous? I thought you wanted me to push it forward. I do, Mel replied, her voice soft but firm. But progress comes at a cost. By tightening security and exposing corruption, you've made yourself a target. Jace's expression darkened. If that's the cost of doing the right thing, so be it. Mel turned to face him fully, her gaze piercing. The other counselors won't see it that way. Many of them have grown used to bending the rules, using their wealth and influence to break trade laws with impunity. Your new measures threaten that. So what? Jace asked, his frustration bubbling to the surface. I'm just supposed to let them keep exploiting the system? No, Mel said, her voice steady. But you need to be careful. Enemies aren't always obvious, Jace. Sometimes, they're sitting at the same table as you. Jace's jaw tightened, but he nodded. I'll keep that in mind. Mel leaned back in her seat, her gaze returning to the stage. Good, because if you're going to reshape Piltover, you'll need more than ideals. You'll need strategy. As the music swelled, Jace glanced at her, the weight of her words sinking in. He had come so far, but the road ahead was fraught with challenges and enemies he was only beginning to understand. The abandoned arcade was a relic of a different time, its once bright neon lights now faded and flickering intermittently. Dust coated every surface, and the air smelled faintly of rust and mildew. Broken arcade machines lined the walls, their screens cracked or dark, and the faint echoes of distant machinery reverberated through the silence. Jinx pushed open the heavy door with a creak, the sound cutting through the stillness like a knife. She took a tentative step inside, her wide blue eyes scanning the room. The memories hit her all at once, a flood of laughter, of arguments, of her sister's voice echoing through the space. Wow, Naruto muttered behind her, his glowing eyes sweeping across the room. It's like a time capsule. Jinx didn't respond immediately. Instead, she walked deeper into the arcade, her fingers brushing against the edge of an old console. She stopped in front of a machine that stood taller than the rest, a punching machine, its weathered exterior still bearing the scars of countless impacts. She tilted her head, a faint smile tugging at her lips. This used to be Vi's favorite. Naruto walked up beside her, studying the machine. Its scoreboard was still functional, though dim, and every single entry bore the same name, 6. That's a lot of first-place wins, Naruto remarked, his tone light. Jinx's smile faltered as she stared at the name. Her fists clenched at her sides as the memories bubbled to the surface by cheering her on, showing her how to throw a proper punch, teasing her when she could barely move the needle on the machine. Then came the fights, the explosion, and the betrayal. Her breath quickened as the weight of it all pressed down on her chest. "Let's fix it," she said abruptly, her voice tinged with determination. Naruto watched her as she rummaged through a nearby toolbox, her movements frenetic but focused. Within minutes, she had the machine powered on, its lights flickering to life. Jinx wiped her hands on her pants and stepped back, her eyes narrowing as she stared at the punching pad. "Let's see if I've still got it," she muttered. Jinx wound up and delivered a powerful punch to the machine. The impact echoed through the arcade, and the needle on the scoreboard shot up before falling just short of the top score. She gritted her teeth and tried again, each strike harder than the last. With every punch, her frustration and anger poured out at Vi, at Silco, at herself. Naruto stood back, watching her in silence. He could feel the storm of emotions radiating off her, the pain and longing she buried beneath her wild demeanor. He wanted to say something, to comfort her, but he knew this was something she needed to face on her own. Finally, after a particularly hard hit, the machine beeped, and her name appeared on the scoreboard's second place, just below Vi's high score. Jinx stared at the screen, her chest heaving as she caught her breath. Her hands trembled at her sides, and for a moment, Naruto thought she might cry. "You almost got her," Naruto said, stepping forward with a small smile. Jinx glanced at him, her lips curving into a faint smirk. "Almost," she repeated, her voice soft but bitter. Naruto leaned against the machine, his glowing eyes meeting hers. "You'll get her next time." Jinx laughed lightly, though there was no joy in the sound. "It's not about the score, Naruto." Naruto nodded slowly. "I know." Jinx sat on a nearby counter, twirling a wrench absent-mindedly. Her usual manic energy was subdued, replaced by a rare quiet. She glanced at Naruto, noting his distant expression. "What's with you?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. "You've been all spaced out." Naruto hesitated, his fingers brushing the edge of the machine as if grounding himself. "I've been thinking," he began, his tone uncharacteristically serious. Jinx tilted her head, intrigued. "That's dangerous." Naruto chuckled lightly, but didn't rise to the banter. Instead, he looked at her, his glowing eyes meeting hers. "I think I need to go back. To the top side." Jinx froze, her smirk fading. "What? Why would you want to go up there?" Naruto straightened, his gaze unwavering. "Because I need to know about the Uzumakis." Jinx's expression shifted, a flicker of something close to panic flashing across her face. "Who cares about them? They're just a name. A bunch of dead people. You've got everything you need down here." Naruto shook his head slowly. "No, things. It's more than that. I keep hearing their names: Minato, Kushina. Everyone talks about them like they were legends. And then there's this place." He gestured vaguely toward his chest, where the hex crystal pulsed faintly beneath his skin. "This thing that's part of me. I don't even know what it is or why it's here." He paused, his voice dropping. "I don't know who I am." Jinx jumped down from the counter, her wrench clattering to the floor as she marched up to him. "Who cares who you were?" she snapped, her voice rising. "You're Naruto, my Ruto, the guy who's always been there for me, no matter what. Isn't that enough?" Naruto sighed, his expression softening as he placed a hand on her shoulder. "It is, but it's not just about me. I need to understand where I come from, what this is." He tapped his chest. "If I don't, I'll never really know what I'm fighting for." Jinx pulled away, crossing her arms tightly. "You don't need to fight for anything. You've got me. We're fine. We're better than fine." Naruto's heart ached at the desperation in her voice. He stepped closer, his voice gentle. "I'm not leaving you, Jinx. I could never do that. But I can't ignore this anymore. I have to know." Jinx turned away, her shoulders tense. "You're gonna go up there, find out you're some fancy topside-ear prince or something, and then what? You'll forget all about me." "That's not going to happen," Naruto said firmly. "You're my family, Jinx. No matter what I find up there, that's never going to change." She didn't respond, her fingers gripping the edge of the counter tightly. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken fears and emotions. After a long pause, Jinx finally turned to face him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You promise?" Naruto nodded, his voice steady. "I promise." Jinx wiped at her eyes quickly, forcing a grin. "Fine. But don't come back all high and mighty, okay? I don't need another topsider telling me what to do." Naruto smiled, the tension easing slightly. "Deal." As they left the arcade together, Naruto's resolve hardened. The top side held the answers he sought, the truth about the Uzumakis, the crystal, and himself. But no matter what he discovered, he knew one thing for certain. His bond with Jinx was unbreakable, and that bond would guide him back to her, no matter how far he had to go. Vi and Caitlin stood outside the transformed last drop, its neon lights brighter and more garish than Vi remembered. The air was thick with the sound of raucous laughter and heavy music spilling into the streets of Zaun. The familiar place that once felt like home now radiated menace and decadence. Vi's fists clenched at her sides as her jaw tightened. Her sharp eyes scanned the exterior, taking in the new signs of Silco's rule, the banners, the additional guards, the air of untouchable authority. "Shady-looking place," Caitlin commented, eyeing the bouncers at the door and the clientele stumbling in and out. "You don't know anything," Vi snapped, her tone biting. Caitlin blinked at the sudden hostility, but before she could respond, Vi turned away. "Let's go." The sigil from Jericho's napkin had led them to an unassuming door at the edge of the district. The carved mark above it was subtle but unmistakable. Vi pushed it open, the sound of sultry music and murmured conversations greeting them as they stepped inside. The air was thick with perfume and smoke, and the dim lighting cast long, hazy shadows across the lavish interior. Caitlin faltered, her eyes darting around the room. The opulent decor, scantily clad workers, and unapologetic indulgence were far removed from anything she'd ever experienced in Piltover. "What's the plan?" Caitlin whispered, leaning closer to Vi. Vi smirked, tilting her head toward Caitlin. "Simple. Blend in." Caitlin raised an eyebrow. "Blend in? How exactly do you suggest I do that?" Vi's grin widened, clearly enjoying Caitlin's discomfort. "Act like you have what they want." "And what do I have?" Caitlin asked skeptically. Vi's gaze roved over her, her expression turning mockingly serious. "You're hot, cupcake." Caitlin's cheeks reddened, and she crossed her arms defensively. "That's not a plan." Vi frugit. "Word for me." Without waiting for Caitlin's rebuttal, Vi grabbed a nearby patron, a round-faced man with a wide grin who was clearly enjoying the atmosphere. "Him, right?" she asked casually. The man blinked at her in surprise. "Oh yeah, great. Keep my friend company, will you?" Vi said, steering him toward Caitlin before disappearing into the crowd. Vi slipped through the brothel's winding hallways with practiced ease, eventually reaching the private office at the back. She pushed open the door without knocking, earning a startled gasp from the woman inside. Babette, the brothel's madam, sat behind a mahogany desk, her sharp eyes narrowing when she recognized Vi. Well, she said, leaning back in her chair. "The prodigal daughter returns. I thought you were dead." "Sorry to disappoint," Vi replied, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. "I need answers." Babette sighed, lighting a thin cigar. "And here I thought you were just here for a reunion." Vi ignored the jab, her voice hardening. "Where's Powder?" The question hung in the air, heavy and raw. Babette's expression softened slightly, but she shook her head. "I don't know. And even if I did, do you think she's the same girl you left behind?" "Wie ist jo Zeitzend." "Maybe not, but she's still my sister." Babette exhaled a plume of smoke, her gaze thoughtful. "Look, Vi, things changed after Vander. No one's been able to stop Silco. Not you, not me, not anyone." "Maybe not," Vi said, stepping closer to the desk. "But someone's got to try." Babette studied her for a long moment before nodding. "Sevica, she's your best bet. She's a regular here. One of my staff, Miguel, can tell you where to find her." As Vi exited the office, she scanned the room for Caitlin. It didn't take long to find her, sitting comfortably at a small table with a patron, a glass of something dark and smoky in her hand. Caitlin's posture was relaxed, her laughter light as she leaned slightly toward her companion. She looked entirely at ease, a stark contrast to the stiff, nervous woman who had entered the brothel earlier. Vi raised an eyebrow, impressed despite herself. "Well, look at you," she said as she approached. Caitlin turned, her smile lingering. "What?" "You said to blend in." Vi smirked, nodding toward the exit. "Come on, we've got a lead." As they stepped back into the night, Caitlin glanced at Vi. "You really think this Sevica will help?" Vi's smirk faded, replaced by a steely determination. "She won't, but she'll talk." Caitlin adjusted the strap of her rifle. Her curiosity piqued. "And what if she doesn't?" Vi's smirk returned, this time tinged with a sharp edge. "Then I'll make her." The opulent theater was alive with soft murmurs and the quiet hum of anticipation as attendees settled into their seats. Jace sat beside Mel in the mezzanine box, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts despite the serene melody filling the air. On stage, a musician played an intricate, hybrid instrument, a masterpiece of art and hextech that emitted ethereal tones, resonating with an otherworldly beauty. Jace glanced at Mel, her poised demeanor contrasting with his restlessness. "It's incredible," he said, gesturing toward the performance. "The way hextech can create something so moving." Mel smiled faintly, but her gaze was sharper than her serene exterior suggested. "Progress comes in many forms, Jace. Some more palatable than others." Jace frowned, sensing the shift in her tone. "What do you mean?" Mel leaned closer, her voice soft but deliberate. "Your tighter security measures have shaken things up. You've upset the balance, made yourself enemies among the merchants, the counselors. They don't like losing their loopholes." Jace sat back, his jaw tightening. "If that's the cost of keeping the hex gate secure, so be it. I'm not compromising safety for their corruption." Mel studied him, her expression unreadable. "It's not about compromising. It's about diplomacy. Favors amongst friends. That's just a euphemism for corruption." Jace snapped, though his tone lacked venom. Mel tilted her head, her smile returning. "It's about positioning yourself. As a symbol of the future, Jace, you have the power to shape your destiny and Piltover's. But you can't do it alone." Jace's frustration softened as he considered her words. "I didn't come this far to become a puppet." "Good," Mel said with a touch of warmth. "Because puppets don't change the world." Back at the lab, Victor's world was far from the grandeur of the theater. The dim light of his workstation cast long shadows as he hunched over the hex core, its intricate runes glowing faintly. Frustration radiated from him as he meticulously adjusted its configuration, but no matter what he tried, the device remained unresponsive. Sky approached quietly, setting a cup of tea beside him. "You've been at this all day. Maybe you should take a break." Victor didn't look up, his voice curt but not unkind. "I can't. Not until it works." Sky hesitated before offering, "I could walk you home." "Or, no," Victor interrupted, his tone sharp. "I'll stay here tonight." Sky nodded reluctantly, retreating as Victor returned to his work. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted a rune, his focus narrowing until the outside world disappeared. But no breakthrough came. Frustrated, he swept his notes off the table, sending them fluttering to the floor. He leaned against the desk, his breath shallow. A cough racked his body, and he raised a hand to his mouth only to find it stained with blood. "Not now," he muttered, his voice hoarse. His vision blurred, and the world tilted. He collapsed onto the desk, his blood pooling on the surface. Unnoticed, the hex core began to stir, the faint glow intensifying. The blood seemed to respond, crawling toward the device in rivulets. As Victor lay unconscious, a single drop of blood levitated off the table, weaving itself into the core's intricate patterns. The glow deepened, the hex core pulsating as if alive. Back at the theater, Jace and Mel left the performance, their conversation lingering on the promise of Hextech. As they strolled through the quiet halls, Mel turned to him with an expression that was both fond and calculating. "You've done so much already," she said softly. "Imagine what you'll achieve next." Jace hesitated, her words resonating with the ambition that had driven him this far. "I just hope it's worth it." Mel's smile softened, and without warning, she leaned in and kissed him. Jace froze for a moment before responding, the weight of the evening's discussions giving way to the warmth of her touch. The night blurred as they returned to her quarters. As the city of Piltover shimmered outside the window, their passion ignited a rare moment of vulnerability and connection for both. While Mel and Jace shared an intimate moment, Victor lay still, the glow of the hex core illuminating his lifeless features. The device pulsed rhythmically, the intricate runes shifting as the drop of blood wove itself into its fabric. Sparks of energy crackled around the core, signaling the beginning of something new. In Silco's office, Marcus paced in front of Silco's desk, his fists clenched and his expression etched with frustration and fear. The neon glow of Zon filtered through the lone window, casting an eerie light over the scene. "You don't understand," Marcus snapped, his voice tight. "Jace is a counselor now. He's digging into everything: transactions, Hexgate logs, enforcer reports. It's only a matter of time before he uncovers this." He gestured wildly, encompassing both Silco and himself in the accusation. Silco leaned back in his chair, exhaling a plume of smoke. His expression was calm, almost amused. "And what do you propose we do, Sheriff?" "Run." Marcus stopped pacing, slamming his hands on the desk. "This has gone too far. I never wanted any of this." Without a word, Silco reached into a drawer and placed one of Jinx's signature grenades on the desk between them. The ominous monkey design leered up at Marcus, its painted grin mocking him. "Perhaps you should end it then," Silco suggested, his tones smooth and unbothered. "One pull of the pin, and your problems vanish. Me gone. The firelights implicated. Your conscience clear." Marcus's hand trembled as he reached for the grenade. He stared at it, his mind racing with possibilities. For a brief, vivid moment, he imagined pulling the pin, an explosion ripping through the room, consuming them both in fire and smoke. It would be over. The guilt, the lies, the fear. Silco leaned forward, his voice a low murmur. "Do it." The moment stretched endlessly. Marcus's breath quickened, his knuckles white as he gripped the grenade. Then, with a shuddering exhale, he placed it back on the desk. "You're a coward," Silco said, his tone laced with disdain. Marcus said nothing, his shoulders slumping as he turned and walked out of the office, leaving the grenade untouched. From the shadows above, Jinx watched the exchange in silence, her body curled like a cat in the rafters. As Marcus's footsteps faded, Silco spoke, his voice cutting through the stillness. "You can come down now." Jinx leapt lightly to the ground, her blue eyes narrowed. "Why'd you even talk to him?" "He's useless." "Not entirely," Silco replied, steepling his fingers. "But that's not what concerns me right now. What concerns me is you." Jinx crossed her arms defensively. "What about me?" Silco leaned forward, his piercing gaze locking onto hers. "We need that Hextech weapon. You know that." Jinx's smirk faltered, her bravado crumbling. "I told you I can't. Every time I try, it's like I'm back there. The explosion, the light, the screaming." Her voice cracked, and she looked away, biting her lip to keep from trembling. "Then make it stop," Silco said sharply, standing and approaching her. "You're not Powder anymore. Powder is the one who hesitates, who crumbles under pressure. But you, Jinx, you're stronger than that." Jinx glared at him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Naruto left. The words hit Silco harder than he let on. His jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "Naruto will come back. He always does. He doesn't care about me anymore," Jinx muttered, her voice small. Silco placed a hand on her shoulder, his tone softening. "You're wrong. Naruto cares about you more than anything. You're his anchor, just as he is yours. And he agrees with me that Jinx is perfect." Her shoulders shook, but she didn't pull away. Silco led Jinx through the winding streets of Zon, the air growing colder and damper as they descended. The familiar scent of the river hit her, and she stopped, her heart pounding. "Why are we here?" she asked, her voice wary. "This is where it all began for me," he said quietly, his voice carrying an unusual weight. "This is where Vander tried to kill me." Jinx tilted her head, her curiosity momentarily distracting her from the turmoil inside. "Vander? You never told me that." Silco's lips curled into a grim smile. He thought he could break me, drown me, wash away the parts of me he didn't like. And in a way, he succeeded. He knelt by the edge of the water, his fingers brushing the surface. The man I was died here under these waves, and the man I became rose from them. Jinx crossed her arms, her usual bravado creeping back into her voice. So what? You think I need to take a swim to figure myself out? Silco turned to her, his piercing gaze cutting through her deflection. You're holding on to something that no longer serves you. Powder, the scared little girl who hid behind others. She has no place in the life you've chosen. Jinx bristled, stepping back. You don't know anything about me. Powder's not holding me back. I'm just, I don't know, figuring it out. Silco stepped closer, his voice softening. You're stronger than you think, Jinx. You've already proven that. But you can't keep looking backward. Powder is a weight you don't need to carry. Jinx hesitated, her fists clenching as her mind raced. What about Naruto? She asked, her voice quieter. He didn't just let go of who he was. Silco smiled faintly. Naruto doesn't have the luxury of holding on. He doesn't know who he was. But he's chosen who he wants to be your partner, your equal. And you? You're his world. Jinx looked away, her emotions swirling. He left. He'll come back, Silco said firmly. Because he knows where he belongs, is with you. Jinx turned back to Silco, her eyes narrowing. You know something about him, don't you? About who he was. Silco's expression didn't falter. I know everything about him. I know he was born to a family of topsider legends in Piltover, if you believe the stories about Minato and Kushina Uzumaki. I know he lost them, lost everything, the same way you did. Jinx's breath caught. Then why didn't you tell him? Silco's voice softened, almost fatherly. Because it doesn't matter. Naruto is not defined by his past, and neither are you. He's here now with you. And that's all that matters. He stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. I've come to see him as my own, in a way. Just as I've come to see you as my daughter. You two are my legacy, and I won't let anything take that from us. Jinx stared at him, her emotions a tempest of doubt, anger, and longing. So what am I supposed to do? Let go, Silco said simply. Silco guided Jinx to the edge of the river, his hands firm but gentle on her shoulders. It's time to let Powder rest, to leave her behind and embrace who you truly are. Jinx's breathing quickened as she looked at the dark water, her reflection distorted by the ripples. I don't know if I can, she whispered. You can, Silco insisted. Because you already have. You just need to accept it. Before she could respond, he pressed a hand against her back, easing her into the water. The cold bit at her skin as the murky depths swallowed her. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, the world above dimming as the water enveloped her. Memories flooded her mind-vised laughter, the explosion, the screams, Naruto's comforting voice, Silco's unwavering belief in her. The conflicting fragments of her past and present collided, threatening to drown her. Then a single thought pierced the chaos. I am Jinx. She surfaced with a gasp, her breath ragged as she clung to the edge of the bank. Silco knelt beside her, his expression calm and expectant. Well, he asked. Jinx looked at him, water dripping from her hair, her blue eyes burning with clarity. Powder's gone, she said, her voice steady. I'm Jinx. Silco smiled, pulling her to her feet. Good. Now let's show the world what Jinx can do. That's it for today. I will stop here. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you please consider subscribe and make sure to hit that like button, share with your friends, and don't forget to check out author of this story. Details in description.